This story will tell about a peaceful guy who almost no one paid attention to. For a long time, he lived quietly and calmly, until one day a magician accidentally appeared near his house. The spirits of this wizard were clearly displeased with the master's emergency landing. Russell managed to quickly suppress all the objections of his assistants. It was not for nothing that he had collaborated with them for a long time. During the interaction, the guy thoroughly studied all the weak points of the spirits so that they would not object. True, despite all his powers, the magician was not always able to save not only himself, but also the creatures around him. It was at this moment that our hero, whose name was James Lin, came to Russell's aid. The wizard was not used to trusting strangers, but at this moment, he really needed help. James's feline assistant quickly assessed the situation, as his skills were well developed. Leo's keen eyes did not miss the fact that one of the unknown creatures had managed to receive damage. The cat was proud of his recently acquired analytical skills, as he had not developed them at all before. However, the hero was lucky, and he found a way to increase his level and the level of his pets. So soon the bird Chap was ready to heal the unknown guest with the help of the artifact. The creature's face would have been filled with gratitude if it had not been made entirely of bones. But Russell was able to thank James for simply doing him such an important favor. If it weren't for Lin, the guests from another dimension would have wandered around this world for a long time. So the magician was left with a good impression of the guy, whom he considered promising. The wizard was sure that a good future awaited this man, albeit one full of adventures. It is unlikely that they will meet again on the way, but if they do, they will be on the same side. In the end, however, the hero was left with so many problems after his new friend that he didn't want to meet him. But James has secured good support that could prove useful to him in the future. In the hero's world, it was difficult to live for those who did not receive a drop of spiritual energy at birth. Many creatures that were endowed with magic eventually evolved into great beasts. They were divided into skills and levels, which they could increase under certain circumstances. The same gradation affected people, and those who had strong magic were valued the most. But all the events passed the hero by for a long time, since he had no awakening. So, together with his simple animals, he lived far from the main activities of this world. It wasn't that James didn't like this peace. He was only depressed by the lack of money. Moreover, Leo always found something new to do, which kept the young master from getting bored. Lin only communicated with assistants every day after his parents died and his sister left. The guy ran a small store alone, although there were practically no sales. But he loved his work and was not going to give up, even if he ended up in the red. James understood from the very beginning that it was unlikely that anyone would buy plants that were so weak in spirit. Leo always consoled his master, although he himself understood perfectly well the hopelessness of their situation. Besides the cat, Lin had an assistant in the form of a bird named Shichebe, who also took care of him. From birth, the hero's body was so weak that it could not withstand spiritual energy. That's why for a long time he couldn't develop either himself or his pets to even slightly raise their level. For this same reason, sales were so bad that James was only tired of being bored. Many people walked along this street, but no one paid attention to the modest shop. This is all because the creatures in it were of a lower level, and no one wanted to communicate with them. The other animals openly laughed at James's assistants, who were not very bright. This angered Leo the most, because more than anything in the world, he wanted to be fluffy and smart. At such moments, James always reassured his friend so that he would not worry about his lack of strength. The best way to lift their spirits was to go for walks, which the pets loved. Although the hero did not always have money for good meat, he tried to encourage his friends. That's why they often went for walks in the middle of the working day, since there were no customers at the store anyway. James was very worried about his body not being able to accept spiritual energy. This walk might have ended as usual if not for the appearance of a mad, magical pig. Leo misjudged the situation because his strength was not enough to defeat her. Only at the last moment did the hero manage to save his assistant, who had behaved so carelessly. The pig had no intelligence, so it could only think about how to destroy its opponents. Her abilities were no match for the mage's, but James did not know how to control his powers. Therefore, the young man had no choice but to run away, although he understood that he would hardly be able to save himself. At the most inopportune moment, the guy fell to the ground as fatigue overwhelmed him. Despite the threat of death, The pets bravely rushed to defend the master who had always been kind to them. It was at this moment that something happened that forever divided the hero's life into before and after. The danger finally awakened the magic in him that had been dormant for so long and so stubbornly somewhere inside. As a child, James accidentally absorbed a ring, which disappeared as soon as it touched the hero's blood. And now the ring has returned to Lin, returning to him all the abilities that were not manifested. The young man was no longer defenseless against the dangerous beast which had clearly gone mad. Even the weakest magic would have been enough to stop the mad pig's run, and Leo was the one who needed help, as he barely had time to dodge the blows of the stupid beast. For the first time in a long time, James felt an unknown force filling him from head to toe. The boy clearly felt the pig's magic, and therefore was able to understand that she was a level higher. So the hero's strength was still not enough to deal with the beast personally. Lin urgently needed to figure out why the ring had evolved and how to use it. Until then, Lin won't be able to save his friends because he can't control his abilities. The pig was only level 3, but the gap between level 1 and level 1 was still noticeable. That's why no amount of claws would have helped Leo escape the attack if he hadn't dodged. The helpers found themselves in an awkward situation when they attracted the attention of a rabid animal. Only a wise plan could save them all, so James could not stand aside. On his orders, Shabe began to distract the pig with her voice in order to gain at least a little time. This worked very well, as the bird's singing was capable of scaring even the people around it. The pig became even more disoriented, although this only increased his anger. Never before had he attacked so fiercely. But Shachebe was able to dodge the blow in time. The birdie had not yet really noticed the changes that had occurred to her after her master had awakened. But James immediately realized that he wouldn't last long, because he hadn't yet been able to cope with his new strength. He could only pray that the magic boost from the bracelet would last a little longer, and the prayers helped, as the assistant felt a new surge of strength and was able to continue the battle. Without James's support, there was no way Shebi would have done any damage to the pig. The diversionary maneuver worked, but the hero could not yet breathe a sigh of relief, because the enemy had not been defeated. On Lin's orders, Leo, who had been secretly preparing for the attack all this time, jumped on the pig. The cat managed to figure out that the animal's weak spot was its nose, and that's where he aimed. This is how James won a battle for the first time in his life, although before he had only run away. But the hero did not have time to experience joy, because immediately after the pig's escape, he fainted, and the animal continued its journey through the city in search of weak victims. It so happened that the pig came across Chia and Labi Mayer, who were relatives of James. The woman immediately suspected something was wrong, as she noticed signs of a fight with someone on the pig. But she didn't have any attacking animals, so it was up to the man to deal with the animal. Meanwhile, the hero once again found himself in his subconscious, where he had previously been denied access. Over the years that the ring was inside the boy, it acquired its own consciousness, and now the young man wanted his object to share with him the power that it had accumulated within itself. Before, James had only heard about subspace that was formed due to magic. He would never have thought that such a simple thing would suddenly acquire magical powers. The bracelet had amazing properties, as it allowed one to increase the levels of other creatures. But first, Lin needed to upgrade himself. Otherwise, his strength wouldn't be enough for improvements. The saddest thing was that leveling up required a lot of money and abilities. However, James was not used to getting upset quickly, since everything could be resolved later. At that moment, he heard voices from somewhere far away, and realized that it was time for him to return. The awakening was not a pleasant one, as the animals were pressing too hard on their beloved owner. But Lin didn't even think of being offended by his pets, because they were sincerely worried about him. As he expected, Aunt Shia was nearby in case his condition worsened sharply. Throughout his life, the hero rarely sought help, despite the fact that his parents died early. And now, he has not changed his decision to be alone, although he was grateful for the support. The Mayer family quickly took the boy to the hospital and prescribed treatment with the magic fish. As soon as the doctor stabilized the patient's condition, he immediately left the room with the patient. Meanwhile, Uncle's little animal decided to be the boss and brought James a pre-prepared lunch. Chia personally volunteered to ensure that her nephew ate all the food that was collected for his recovery. Lin felt awkward refusing in this situation, even though he wasn't hungry after everything that had happened. In the near future, Chia was going to do everything to quickly get the guy back on his feet. So soon the hero set out on grueling training sessions that increased his physical strength. Any kind of stress quickly exhausted James. So much so that he hadn't even thought about working out before. But now Libli insisted on this method, since he did not know that his nephew had gained powers. Lin wasn't ready to tell even his close ones about this, so he pretended to be training hard. Only now was James able to learn that his uncle had not a simple illness, but a magical one. That's why, for many years, Libli couldn't get rid of the parasite and eventually forgot how to walk. The Mayer family was always so busy with business that even now they only looked after Lin for a short time. But this suited the hero, because now he had to solve her many questions about his abilities. The first thing the young man did was head home to personally check what he could now do. And James just happened to come across a simple plant that he had been unsuccessfully trying to level up. There was a chance that now the young man would finally be able to change the level of this flower. From somewhere in Lin's head, the knowledge of what to do next appeared on its own. The guy easily concentrated his forces on the plant, and soon received a positive result. James himself at first did not believe that he had finally succeeded in something he could not even dream of. Lin's abilities allowed him to immediately understand that changes had occurred in his pets as well. And indeed, Chap and Leo suddenly increased their level, since they were also close to the master. The cat has now become a little smarter, although before this he had a memory almost like that of an ordinary fish, while the bird learned to sing more beautifully, which was very important for its self-esteem. Never before had the hero experienced such joy, because now he could quickly become rich. Lin had no idea how much the ability to increase the levels of creatures would open up to him. In this world, the evolution of creatures was an extremely complex matter, which not every master could achieve. Many have spent years searching for secrets that would lead them to a positive result. This meant that if anyone found out about Lin's abilities, a real hunt would begin for him. Only a phone call distracted the hero from the terrible thoughts that had just visited him. It turned out that James's sister missed him, as they had not spoken for a long time. The guy was always happy to talk to Emily, especially in such a difficult situation for him. The girl was very talented since childhood, so her brother sent her to the best magic school. But she knew very well about his weak powers, so every time she was eager to return home. Only James's words stopped Emily from returning, because she would just be wasting her time. They had an agreement that the girl had to study diligently, and the younger Lin followed this rule. She easily completed any assignments from teachers, since Emily always grasped everything quickly. The only thing that worried the girl was that soon each student would choose a creature for himself. Lin knew he had good abilities, but her family had almost no money, so Emily wasn't going to be a burden to her brother, who was already paying for all of her education. Although the teacher insisted on a good creature for the girl, Lin had no other choice. She had already decided to connect her life with some simple animal, because she could not afford a strong one. At that time, Emily did not yet know that James was making every effort to earn money. In a couple of days, he leveled up several plants, which he could now sell at a good price. And the guy wasn't going to stop there until his sister's teacher called him. Madame was shocked that Emily chose an ordinary beetle with protection that was not particularly valued. The woman was confident of a good future for the younger Lin. If only she had a suitable beast. Only James, as the older brother, could help his sister by buying a good creature, but the guy had too little time to earn a large sum. However, on Leo's advice, the boy still went to the festival where various animals were sold. Many merchants offered only food to entertain customers attracted by the animals. The hero was only interested in unusual creatures, and he thought about how he could get by without money. Only Leo never ceased to be happy that they had gotten to such an interesting event, but his enthusiasm diminished when the hero confessed how much the unusual creatures cost. As they walked, Lin constantly sensed the aura of plants that he could easily refine. The boy was literally drawn to all creatures whose growth and level he could influence. But Leo didn't even give the owner time to think, as he had already rushed to bargain with one of the sellers. But the hero didn't plan to acquire the creature that his pet was targeting. For his sister's sake, James was more selective about the animals that could serve her. That's why he rejected most of the options, despite the fact that the creatures were rare. To top it all off, the hero had so little money that no one agreed to cooperate with him. Until the very end, Lin could not make up his mind, worrying about his sister's future. Only after some time did the hero find a sheep that was ideal in all respects. These creatures possessed not only defensive abilities, but also good protection. So Emily would easily make friends with one of the sheep, whose nature was always peaceful. That's why Lin had no doubts about his choice when he asked the seller how much these animals cost. The man looked like he had no intention of selling anyone, even though he had come to the festival. But he changed his mind when the hero specifically named a higher price for one of the sheep. But even this was not enough, as the merchant still asked for twice as long, so James was left with nothing again, as he didn't have enough money for any creature. However, not all was lost, because soon the young man heard a saving speech from one of the sellers. Only Lena had the power to heal wounded animals, and they could be bought cheaply. So he became interested in the offer of a man named Yannick, who also sold meat. Only James became interested in looking at the animals, whose treatment was too expensive. Of course, the merchant would never show the creatures he had hidden to just anyone, so the hero had to use the bracelet's abilities to charm the talkative man. And soon, James finally saw creatures that could be useful to him in the future. The condition of the first animals was indeed so deplorable that they could soon die. But all this meant nothing to the hero, who could easily heal everyone in this world. The young man could only hope that the man would agree to make a deal with him. Yannick was not one to take people's words for granted when they promised him an exchange instead of paying him in cash. But Lin managed to interest the merchant with his offer, because he had rare plants. James's words sounded very tempting, and for some reason the merchant believed that the guy was telling the truth. So he showed his new friend the animal that had suffered the most in the last fight. It was not surprising that the hero immediately wanted to acquire this bull as well. He had no doubt that he would be able to cure the animal without any problems, despite its terrible condition. Never before had Lin been so confident in himself as at that moment when his powers awakened. It was clear from Yannick's face how much he doubted the risky idea of an exchange. But the man was a good judge of character, so he saw that James was not deceiving him in his promises. So soon a deal was made between them that was beneficial for both parties. It was not for nothing that Yannick was a merchant for a long time, because during his life he acquired many useful items, and one of them was a magic cube that could accommodate various creatures of any size. Leo, who was a fan of all sorts of such subjects, was most surprised by this. The cat had never seen huge animals disappear into such a cube before. For a time, the object became several times larger, but soon it should return to its original size. Yannick was always careful with such things, so his cube was in perfect condition. But most of all, the merchant cared for the pet, which he raised from the moment of its birth. As a result, the lizard quickly gained a high level and also acquired useful abilities in the process. James felt an incredible interest in the creature, which was more developed than many creatures. Yannick rarely boasted about the lizard, even though he was so wonderful. And there was a reason for that. As soon as the fiery pet appeared at the event, most people were against it, so all they could do was fly away from the festival as quickly as possible so as not to embarrass anyone anymore. The lizard was just ready to fly, as he had long dreamed of stretching his powerful wings. He rose into the air so quickly that the hero barely had time to grab hold of it tightly to keep from falling. The only thing that saved James was that he lived very close to the festival, and their flight was not long. Although the guy was not used to such flights, he still withstood the physical strain on his body. Meanwhile, Yannick became the first guest in many days that Lin lived only with assistance. The man immediately appreciated all the plants that the boy had been working on for several days in a row. James could not have dreamed that the guest's reaction would be so violent and bright. Yannick was quite the connoisseur, and immediately discovered that all the plants were of the highest quality. He approached many companies, but they all refused to help him obtain such specimens. Since childhood, the man dreamed of opening a farm for sale, rather than developing creatures. Lin had no doubt that after what he had seen, the merchant would not refuse a profitable deal with him. And indeed, Yannick named a good price for each plant he would like to take with him. Leo was the most surprised by this amount, as he had not expected such generosity. But the hero knew that the man would be interested, although he had too little goods at the moment. Yannick couldn't pass up such a good opportunity, because the realization of his dream was now just around the corner. Now the merchant needed several hundred plants of exactly the same amazing quality. The hero was able to prepare everything necessary to please his friend in about a week. Yannick didn't even dare to expect that his dream would be so close thanks to a chance meeting. The man did not regret at all that he was leaving such good creatures, exchanging them for plants. He had long dreamed of changing his line of work, and James gave him this opportunity. In fact, Lin had been waiting for a long time for the moment when Yannick would leave his house together with the lizard, all because the guy was eager to start treating the animals he had recently received. James needed to start treatment as soon as possible, because the animals' lives were at risk. So the guy didn't hesitate as soon as he had the opportunity to try out the treatment in practice. As soon as the hero began to act, a powerful magical field was created around the bull. It was clear that until the beast could overcome the barrier, it would not be able to evolve to a higher level. For the first time in his life, Lin was so close to such an important event. So he was not going to back down. The young man's entire body was covered in an excited tremor, because the life of the creature depended on his actions. James was most afraid of making a mistake, as it would be fatal to the bull and his abilities. Therefore, he applied all the strength that was left in his reserve at that moment. But everything went so well that the beast was able to reach a level several times higher than before. Only now did Lin notice that he had the opportunity to choose new skills for the mighty bull. And now he had to figure out which quality would be most beneficial for a magical creature. On the one hand, it would be useful to add speed to the beast, since it was too slow due to its weight. But the bull was a defensive type, so it made sense to enhance this useful property for the sake of survival. So the best solution was to choose a skill for the bull that would allow him to heal. In that case, no one would ever dare to touch Emily, who was a rather fragile-looking girl. After recovery, the bull was fully prepared to protect any person who would make a contract with him. And the hero did not need more, since he could not even dream of such a good creature for his sister. Since childhood, Emily's safety was important to James, as their parents could no longer help in any way. As soon as Lin raised the level of such a powerful beast, he felt himself to be much stronger. So the young man had a logical question. How much would increasing the level of his pets improve his strength? But James had to explore all of this a little later, because there was still a lot of work to do due to his new abilities. That same night, events took place near the royal palace that would have a profound impact on the future. This time, two of the city's leading lords received a blessing from the wise ruler Lunali. The woman was a skilled creator, so she prepared a mixture in advance that allowed the animals to develop. She was still very young, but already possessed such energy that no one dared to argue with her. Mei Li and Shikon were also capable of many things, but they were still far inferior to the queen in magical abilities. Lunali treated her subjects with love, who served her faithfully and truly, no matter what. Only the man needed to level up his pet, as he hadn't been able to level it up for a long time. So Shikon boldly asked the ruler to help him, since she herself had given her approval for it. The lord was linked to a black panther whose unique skills were directed towards the offensive side. As soon as the queen cast the spell, the animal fell to the ground in pain, unable to move yet. This was because this was the only way a woman could control the leveling up of magical creatures. The panther's wild and alarming cry could be heard for many kilometers around, although the process was going smoothly. This roar woke up one little rabbit, which was the queen's pet, from its night's sleep. Leveling up was not easy for the panther, but for the sake of her master, she endured all the unpleasant feelings. Meanwhile, the queen remembered the trials of the magicians, which tested people to see their level. Shikon was personally responsible for running the event, helping Mei Li with the difficult test preparations. But even the woman didn't expect that Lunali would allow some people to be assigned a higher level based on the test results. The queen believed in her candidates and hoped that among them she would be able to find a worthy student. Lunali felt that without strong support behind her, she could soon lose her position. And it wasn't even about a possible rebellion of the lords, because they were truly devoted to her. Meanwhile, the hero set off on a short journey to replenish his depleted reserves of strength. The guy chose a good guide for himself, who quickly took him to the right place. The man turned out to be so talkative that at some point, James began to doubt his safety. The whole thing was that the guide became interested in Lin's pets, which he did not take with him. But James himself did not feel sorry for the cat and the bird, since it was impossible to be distracted on this difficult journey. His plans were much more ambitious than any of the friends who had known Lin since childhood could have imagined. The boy carefully searched for magical knowledge that could only come to mind in the most special places. But he couldn't even imagine that the guide would immediately take him to the right place where one of the runes would appear. This event inspired the hero so much that he wanted to immediately move on to find something else. But James underestimated his own weak body, so they soon had to return anyway. The next morning was a very important day for young Emily, who had to choose her creature. From the very morning, the coach motivated the boys not to be afraid of the test in which their animals fought against each other. But the girl hardly listened to the instructions, as she was very worried about how she would perform. She chose a small beetle for herself because her family could not afford a larger one as a pet. Of course, this beetle was nothing compared to the huge creatures that had been fighting in the arena for a long time. But the coach didn't care about the injustice, so he put the seniors and juniors in sparring matches. Emily's classmates were outraged about this, but it seemed as if they could change anything in the current situation. As a result, Lin's opponent was Phoenix, who had been defeating everyone around him for several years. The older students knew that even they were in danger of encountering this guy who was always ruthless. Phoenix was already looking at Emily as if she was just another easy prey for him. But the girl was not going to give up, even though her creature was of low rank. Lin could have broken anyone mentally, as the early death of her parents taught her resilience. But at that moment, the teacher distracted the student, which is why the coach had to delay the fight. The woman was still begging the talented Emily to choose at least a dog instead of an insignificant beetle. At that moment, none of them knew that James was very close, and that his sister's salvation was in his hands. The boy lost a lot of time traveling at night, but still managed to get to school on time. Lin barely concealed the excitement that was tearing him apart inside as he handed the cube with the beast to his little sister. Until the very end, Madam had doubts that Senior Lin had brought with him anything truly worthwhile. Meanwhile, Phoenix was already fully prepared for battle as he summoned his huge royal beetle. Few adults were able to stand up to such a giant, let alone students. Only Emily didn't pay attention to her opponent, as she had guessed the cost of the box he had brought. The girl's entire consciousness was filled with gratitude to her brother, who had tried so hard for her. The younger Lin didn't doubt for a second, because James had never let her down in his life. So Emily made a contract with the magical creature inside the cube before she even saw it. The metal bull was completely healthy and was eager to fight to get the chance to protect his new owner. Its appearance raised questions among everyone, since such an animal was practically never found in these places. So Emily became the youngest owner of the metal bull, which was famous for its strength. However, even this did not make Phoenix afraid, because the guy was confident in the victory of his magical beast. Emily chose action over words, so she was the first to attack her opponent, who boasted a lot in words. Only the teacher's admiring muttering spoiled the moment, as she immediately calculated the cost of Lin's bull. The battle between the beetle and the bull quickly escalated, as neither was willing to lose for the sake of their master. Phoenix was not shy about using the dirtiest tactics, which always quickly led him to victory. And from the outside, it seemed to everyone that Emily was indeed at a disadvantage with her huge bull. However, the girl believed in her new pet so much that she continued to support him in the battle with all her might. Madame still watched the fight with anxiety, as she wanted Emily to win this duel. And only the hero understood that his little sister had chosen the right strategy, relying on the skills of the metal bull. Phoenix raised his pet so well that he did not spare himself at all for the sake of his master's victory. So Emily's assistant had a hard time under the constant barrage of blows that he couldn't dodge. Finally, the king beetle performed a dangerous maneuver, into which he put all his strength and abilities. Due to the incredible speed, Emily didn't have time to react, and after the impact, everything was covered in huge pieces of dust. For a while, people looked around anxiously, trying to guess who exactly had won this difficult battle. Madam was already ready to personally save her favorite student, who was clearly in danger at that moment. But soon the dust cleared, and it became clear to everyone that absolutely nothing had happened to the bull after the blow. Only Emily and James knew about the bull's very useful ability to absorb pain and heal itself. And that is exactly what the beast was doing now, since it had just received several serious injuries. The changes in his aura seriously worried the spectators, who weren't sure who to root for. The teacher quickly assessed the situation and realized that with such an animal, she had no reason to fear for her student. But what James liked most was that his little sister learned to control the bull surprisingly quickly. Until now, Phoenix had refused to admit defeat, even though his beetle was doing virtually no damage to the bull. The guy only hoped that Emily's beast would soon surrender on its own, since it was only receiving damage. This tactic seemed strange to people who had little understanding of what the metal bull was capable of. The teacher was one of the first to realize that Emily's animal had no attack skills, so the phoenix beetle had every chance of taking the lead in a battle it had almost lost. The guy's pet tried his best because it was also important to him that his winning streak not be broken by a defeat. Although the bull was only released into the ring today, he fought stubbornly, protecting young Emily with his whole body. Even the hero couldn't have imagined that his sister would so skillfully use her surroundings to fight back. The phoenix beetle acted in a much more primitive manner, trying to gain dominance by brute force, as its master always did, while Emily's bull maintained a dignity that was only characteristic of strong animals. Their battle resembled a battle between two geniuses, but in the end, one of the beasts, as expected, began to give in to its opponent. Many had no doubt that Phoenix would win again, as he had always been stronger, but no one suspected that the bull had an undeniable advantage over his other opponents. His ability to absorb damage helped to harm the beetle, while the bull itself was almost unharmed. Only the teacher finally realized that victory this time would be on the side of young Emily. The fact that the beetle began to gradually retreat was not at all due to ordinary bad luck and bad mood. Madame felt only the happier that her hopes for Emily had been fully realized. Now Phoenix was forced to leave with nothing, since he no longer had a chance to win. But the guy didn't want to accept defeat, so he ordered the beetle to use cunning. So this time the beast attacked not the bull, which it could not reach, but the young Emily Lin. In fact, the girl expected meanness from Phoenix, who was always arrogant. Although all the adults were on the student's side, none of them had the right to abruptly stop the fight. So Emily had to find a way out of the situation on her own, which was becoming increasingly difficult. Lin resorted to the help of her entourage in time, since her bull was unable to attack in response to blows. As a result, the phoenix beetle was completely defeated, as it had run out of strength. Emily didn't believe until the very end that she had managed to win, because she had expected a different outcome. Even the teacher would not have been able to help the student if it were not for the sudden appearance of the older brother. James always dreamed of Emily not having to worry about a future where it was just the two of them. But even now, the sister was not thinking about her victory, but about where her brother had gotten the money for such a beast. No matter how close they were to each other, the hero did not want to confess everything to his little sister. Once the battle was over, Madame began to talk about how Emily had a great future as a magician. The woman had no doubt that in a couple of years, the younger Lin would join the strong troops. As the older brother, James planned to do everything to ensure that his sister truly chose what she wanted. So they didn't take the yellow dog with them, even though the teacher persistently pushed it on the student. That same evening, the brother and sister explained everything to each other so as not to worry anymore. James had to tear down a little about what he had earned because he had learned to feel the energy. And although this was only half true, the guy was still glad to reconcile with the anxious Emily. They rarely had time to spend together, so they devoted this evening to talking about family. And the teacher had to deal with the naughty dog she brought to the competition herself. That same night, the hero could not sleep, as he was worried about his low-level abilities. Once the guy had awakened, nothing stopped him from doing everything he could to become much stronger in a short period of time. Leo had already selected a good number of smart books for him, which helped fill in the gaps in his theory. Lin understood perfectly well that his sister was able to win the battle only because her spiritual energy was higher, while his energy left much to be desired, as he had only recently begun to use it. The guy had a wide range of directions he could take to develop his abilities. But suddenly the flight accelerated so much that the young man barely managed to stay on the huge bird. The owner of the flying pet suddenly came up with the idea that he needed to show off his animal's maximum abilities. As a result, the bird was so exhausted that without a long rest it would not be able to take to the air again. This break was only to the advantage of the hero, who still had to decide what exactly he was buying. He didn't like deliveries because he couldn't touch the goods in person, so he chose this method. When James returned home in the middle of the night, the pets, as expected, greeted him joyfully. Leo and Shachebi would like to travel with their owner, but their level was too low for now. That's why they had to stay at home, which is why the cat openly expressed his dissatisfaction. He was an inquisitive animal by nature, and now he had also awakened his intellect. But for James, his little friends hadn't changed a bit, and he still knew how to approach them. Who would have thought that a cat would be so greedy for tasty food, even with an increase in level? This is how the conflict was quickly resolved. although in reality, it had not really begun. Of course, in such a situation, James could not leave Shijebe without such a consoling encouragement. And for her, the guy prepared one pot of a tasty plant that he had grown not long ago. While the pets were enjoying their food, the young man had to sort out all the shopping for the house. It was not for nothing that he flew in the middle of the night, since it was easier to deliver a huge amount of plants that way. Only Shebi noticed that one of the flowers differed from the others in its properties. It was a plant that could impart healing properties, which was very important for the hero. James was not prepared to wait another minute, because he wanted to test his theory. The guy was confident that combining his energy with the spirit of the plant would bring results. Lin had never done anything like this before, but his intuition told him how to act correctly. True, he had to work hard to raise at least one level of the plant. However, even this was a huge victory for a man who had been unable to do anything all his life. In fact, the young man did not start this whole experiment for the sake of improving the flower. He was much more interested in finding out how the bracelet and the spirit of Mobius inside it would react to energy surges. The hero couldn't even imagine that as a result he would also increase the level of the creature with whom he had made a contract. Before James could blink, the spirit had dragged him into its space for this reason. After leveling up, this dimension became noticeably larger. But that wasn't even what pleased the hero. The spirit in the bracelet was finally able to manifest its consciousness, although for many years it had lived silently somewhere deep inside. Who would have thought that one day an ordinary guy would acquire such good skills? In the hero's subconscious, there was not only an intelligent spirit, but also an entire lake with powerful magical energy. All this fell upon James so unexpectedly that he did not know what to do with such wealth. Mobius wasn't known for being talkative, which is why Lin had more and more questions. Soon, curiosity got the better of him. So the hero was the first to test the lake's abilities. It turned out that indeed any object in it began to be saturated with strong magical energy. Mobius did a good job of making sure his master was satisfied with the results of his spiritual level rework. But now, this required so much time and effort that the activity seemed unprofitable. But the hero understood that in the future he would be able to quickly level up any animal or plant, while at the current moment, even his spiritual contractor was unable to remain conscious for long. Like James, Mobius was so weak that his waking hours were severely limited. The spirit hoped that the master would soon become much stronger, and that this power would be transferred to him. Young Lin didn't see this as a problem, as he believed in his abilities after everything that had happened to him. Although he lost so much time because the spirit did not appear, the guy did not even think of being sad. Instead, James had already made a plan of action in his head for how he would develop his abilities. And the first point in that plan was a good night's sleep. Because what's the point of trying to do anything on a tired head? And the very next day, the hero began to work hard on increasing the level of plants, which also improved his strength. The pets supported the master in his endeavors, and also studied a lot of useful information for their growth. This is how James's everyday life went, while he prepared a whole bunch of high-quality plants for the merchant Yannick. But the guy didn't feel the least bit tired by the evening, despite having worked all day. Only his pets slept without their hind legs, because the tasks from their owner were too difficult for them. Lin took care of his friends as best he could, who had stayed by his side throughout his life, even in the most difficult situations. While at night, he himself was actively trying to cure the animals that he had recently acquired from a merchant. And exactly a week later, Yannick flew to the house of his new acquaintance, as they had agreed on a deal. The man was afraid until the very end that the guy would not provide him with the promised quantity of elite plants. His heart was beating so fast, as if he were a little boy trying to hide something from his mother. But James met his acquaintance without a shadow of panic on his face, which already inspired confidence in Yannick. The merchant had always been a good judge of character, and Lin showed that he could be trusted in commercial matters. And indeed, the young man made it on time, despite the fact that his task was quite difficult. James's efforts delighted Yannick, who could never have dreamed of such luck. In his entire life, the man had never seen so many good plants in one place. So it was no surprise that the merchant's desire to buy every flower in the pot only grew stronger. Yannick still had the feeling that he was in a beautiful dream, where the dream would soon become reality. That's why he showed so much emotion at that moment, which made him seem a bit strange for a hero. But soon the merchant pulled himself together, because a grown man should not look like a little boy. James could never understand why ordinary plants, albeit of an elevated level, caused so much emotion. The guy forgot how not long ago he himself had rejoiced at the realization that he had learned to improve others. That evening, the hero could not go to sleep peacefully because he heard his pets calling him loudly. It turned out that Leo suddenly noticed an improvement in his level, which happened due to the owner's leveling up. Lin never thought he would be so lucky with improvements after so many years of stagnation. But now the guy seemed to be making up for lost time over many years, since even his pets were developing rapidly. Leo didn't ask the owner any questions, as it was enough for him that the level was gradually rising. For many years, the cat watched other animals with envy, and now he himself has become better. But James still had a question about what kind of improvement had befallen the bird Shebe. It turned out that the second assistant also couldn't come to her senses with joy and couldn't tear herself away from the mirror. If the cat began to develop in intelligence, then the bird suddenly developed fighting skills. But the surprises didn't end there, as the pets practiced their skills every day in the backyard. And now it's time to show the owner what the little bird was able to achieve in attack. Shebe was already so well-oriented in the backyard that she was sure that she would never miss. And the cat also believed in his fighting friend, although in his place anyone would have been afraid of her new abilities. Leo realized too late how dangerous a place he had chosen to support Shebe was. Even the hero could not imagine that a small bird would be so useful in combat. Each of her new skills was better than the previous one in strength and speed, as if it was specially designed for attack. Now James wasn't so afraid to walk the streets, because Shebe could finally protect him. This is how the hero's life as a magician began, although before he had not even dared to dream of such a thing. To avoid being seen on the street, the guy cleverly chose home delivery every day. Shebe continued to train under his supervision, so the boy no longer asked the bird for help, but he loaded the cat with various tasks, since this was useful for an intelligent animal. After acquiring his powers, James had so many things to do that he couldn't handle on his own. That's why he needed Leo's help so much, even though the cat was terrified of those same spiders. In fact, the young man had prepared an important task for his assistant, one related to documentation. Because he was still better at taking care of animals than the little cat, the hero himself was still surprised that he could now feel the spiritual aura of the creatures. But he managed to predict the moment when the spiders would finally increase their magical level. There were only a few hours left to wait for the creatures to recover from their awakening, and soon they both demonstrated completely different evolutionary paths, surprising everyone. The hero was pleased that he now had 2 good spiders to sell. But during all this time, he was so busy that he still hadn't set up a virtual store. It turned out that the cat had just prepared everything necessary to register their goods. Before, James hadn't thought about how useful a cat's intelligence could be, and now he didn't even have to make much effort to become an official merchant. Leo got hold of a card from somewhere, which is where all the money will be deposited after the deal. It had magical scanning properties so that it was possible to avoid entering the goods manually. The hero still had a lot of good plants left after trading with Yannick, so he put them on display. Lin didn't mind selling the spiders either, as he wouldn't be able to use them in his farm. But James didn't stop there, because he couldn't give up exploring space from the inside. While Shebe slept soundly, the guy took the cat with him into the store's virtual dimension. It would have been possible to add all the furniture from a real house to it, but for now, it was too expensive. However, Leo was already impressed by the fact that for the first time in their lives, they had created an improved store for themselves. This place offered the hero many settings, which he intended to get acquainted with later. And today, James has planned a fascinating walk through the vast expanses of the store chain. Both Lin and Leo were dazzled by the sheer number of things presented in the virtual world. Most of the trade took place through this place, as it was more convenient for people to make their choices this way. Soon, James met an assistant who could guide him through all the subjects in this world. But the price of even ordinary pieces of furniture seemed unreasonably exorbitant to the hero, so the guy had to politely decline the purchase to avoid going into the red. As much as Lena wanted to arrange her space in the house, everything took time. However, this place had such wonders around it that the hero did not even think of getting upset. Since he couldn't buy any items, he headed to the next dimension with books. James was well aware of how important training was for his young assistant Leo. The more the cat read, the smarter he became. And this was a very useful quality for the future. So the hero couldn't refuse his assistant's desire to read, because he needed to develop. The little helper was overcome with gratitude at such care from his master. This was the end of their journey through the virtual world, of which there were still many more to come. As soon as the hero returned to his store, His first young customer immediately caught his eye. James hadn't yet had time to set up anything inside, so he met the client empty-handed. The unknown guest looked extremely young, but behaved as if she had ruled the country for a long time. Lin felt awkward from this conversation. Although he couldn't throw the girl out the door, the young shopper was immediately interested in the spiders, despite the fact that they were the most expensive. So James had to quickly give the girl a tour of his property. His pride was a spider that had taken a poisonous path of development after recent evolution. This combination was considered rare, so the girl was so surprised that she couldn't stay on her feet. This is how Lin witnessed that the customer, for some reason, had no hair at all. If he managed to refrain from commenting, then Leo, due to his simplicity, said everything he thought. The girl's name was Rally Mylene, and not long ago she suffered from the bite of a huge poisonous spider. So the lack of hair was just an unpleasant consequence, not a disease from birth. Rally felt uncomfortable talking about this topic because she was worried about her beauty. Only James's delicate communication soon helped the girl come to her senses. At that moment, the hero did not know that Mylene would still seem strange and crazy to him many times. As a seller, he had no right to object to the buyer, even if he was not in the mood. Rally always felt uneasy around spiders, but she had a contract with them since childhood, so the girl had no other choice but to look for strong pets among the spiders. The stranger's behavior immediately suggested to the hero that she had money to buy any creature. For this reason, the guy planned to hold on with all his might to the girl who could help him. So fear paralyzed the young man as soon as he realized that the girl was about to leave the store. It turned out that Rally needed really cool spiders in terms of level and abilities. In this situation, James had nothing to offer, since his animals were indeed inferior for now. But Lin still had hope, because Mylene needed special abilities from any spider. Only a hero could take up breeding spiders to guide their evolution in the right direction. And this proposal already interested Rally, who could not find the strength she needed anywhere. True, the girl still remained so sharp-tongued that she constantly offended the hero. The guy's patience quickly ran out because he had enough self-respect not to communicate with rude people. As soon as James turned away, Rally realized that she really could lose a good chance. That's why the girl instantly changed her mind, although she had only recently been thinking about leaving the store. In fact, Lin had originally hoped for exactly this result, and he succeeded. This is how the guy cleverly acquired his first regular client, who will be waiting for him. From that moment on, Rally was interested in the man who promised her a lot of goods. The only thing the girl didn't like was that the guy laughed at her name in the retail chain. However, she still left some of the money as an advance, as she wanted to get the spiders. Previously, Lin could not even dream of getting such a rich regular client. But times were changing quickly, and even the cat didn't have time to get used to what was happening. What scared Leo most was the speed with which the hero had to spend the money he received. But James himself was no longer afraid of remaining in poverty, because he had his finances under control. So only the cat sank into the depths of sadness because they had earned so little so far. At the moment, the hero didn't even have enough money to buy a robot that would make running the store easier. That's why that evening, the guy couldn't find any comforting words for his little pet. Instead, the young man went to the dimension of Mobius, who could give good advice. It was no longer difficult for him to appear in that space at any time he wanted. Mobius, as usual, greeted the gentleman with a wise look, possessing answers to any questions. It was to him that Lin first laid out his entire cunning plan for making money. In fact, the spirit did not approve of such an aspiration, but had no right to speak out against the master. So he had to agree with James's idea of acquiring a new creature. The very next day, the hero set out in search of that very magical goldfish. He agreed with Mobius in advance on all possible downsides so that everything would work out for him. James relied only on himself all his life, as his parents died early. So the spirit was just a small support for him, while the guy made decisions himself. That's why he had no doubt that he had to spend the last of his money. The young man faced a difficult choice, since there were many magical animals and insects in this world. But soon he found one of the largest stores that he had enough money for. James immediately liked the quiet and calm aura that was present in this place. As soon as he entered the store, the owner, Chaley Milan, immediately greeted the guest. In fact, guests rarely came to see her, so Madame clung to everyone with a death grip. And now she was glad that Lin was interested in the product, of which she had a lot. Goldfish were not particularly popular because their development was always slow and unclear. But James didn't care about these nuances. because he still needed to practice his abilities. Chaley turned out to be an unusually talkative woman who acted as if she was friends with everyone. Milan's behavior was only to Lin's advantage, because he could ask any questions. Naturally, the guy didn't have the money for high-quality fish fed with dragon's blood, so he opted for a very common fish in the hopes that he could evolve it. Milan was immediately ready to pack the animal so that the buyer would not have any problems. The woman couldn't even imagine that the guest would suddenly buy a lot of food for just one fish. James turned out to be the first customer in a long time to place such a large order, so the madam's attitude towards him became even more affectionate and kind, because she was afraid of losing a customer. All this time, the hero masterfully concealed the fact that he had bought the goods with all his last money. He had to continue to play the role of a rich man in front of Chaley in order to win her trust. And this trick worked, because the woman did not notice any catch in the client's finances. So James finally managed to inform them that he would soon need minerals as well. He asked only for low-quality goods, as he did not have enough money for more. But even these were not so easy to obtain, since such things were not popular. Despite the possible low order in the future, Milan still remained charmed by the client. She had so many offers for buyers, but the woman had no one to tell them to, so she was only glad to talk to James, who seemed interested in her words. Only before leaving did the hero wonder why Madame had no customers at all in her store. It turned out that people had been coming to the competition that was taking place nearby for the last few days, and only Milan could not leave the store because she had to carefully monitor the goods. Therefore, the woman could only hope that the people would soon return to her. But for the hero, this festival was an excellent opportunity to observe others. The boys still knew too little about the combat world of magic, having not developed in any way for many years. So it was no surprise that James rushed to the battle arena where the mages were already fighting. Lin hoped to catch at least one powerful battle between two of the country's most powerful mages. It was at that moment that he heard a suspiciously familiar voice that was rooting for each opponent. It turned out that Raleigh was a fan of such events, which is why she never missed a single one. The girl herself did not expect to meet a merchant in such a noisy and crowded place for battles. At that moment, both acquaintances stared at each other as if they were seeing each other for the first time in their lives. But Mylene soon quickly returned to observing, because she always watched the fights closely. James was still pursuing the plan to charm the girl as a client, so he supported her. This made Raleigh instantly happy that someone had the same opinion as her. Only after a few minutes did the acquaintances realize that they had accidentally gotten too close to each other. Mylene couldn't afford such a thing, so she quickly jumped away from the handsome merchant. The girl felt embarrassed for a long time, but still allowed James to stay next to her. The hero had already realized that Raleigh had a fiery temperament, but was also kind, so he was able to get a better look at the opponents who had just entered the ring in front of each other. These girls were both ranked among the best magicians, although they did not boast of their achievements to others. Of course, what interested Mylene most was which of the sorceresses would win, but James still didn't understand which of the girls had a significant advantage. Ciel was distinguished by her predominantly offensive arsenal, which suited her character, so she didn't hesitate to use multiple explosions, since the ring was fenced off with a barrier. The huge beast was confronted by a small plant, which seemed tiny against its background. But Daisy was not embarrassed by such an advantage, since the sorceress was confident in her abilities. Daisy's assistants covered each other well, deftly escaping from the most powerful attacks of their opponents. All this only angered Ciel even more, as she was used to quickly ending any battles with mages. Her beast completely reflected the emotions of its owner, also furiously rushing into battle, despite the damage. As a result, the entire arena was covered in explosions that were difficult to dodge. James didn't expect the battle between the two witches to be so fierce. He saw that both girls were well prepared for battle, but Daisy's rank was slightly higher, so her creatures, despite all the damage, still gradually increased their strength for attacks. But Ciel had no intention of giving up, even though it was hard for her to maintain good positions in battle for so long. But her animals rushed into the attack with renewed vigor each time, while their mistress still had reserves of magic. At this moment, the hero was worried about Daisy, who had practically no attack skills, but the healer herself still remained calm, since she had everything under control. It was not for nothing that the girl was of a higher rank than her rival, because this affected her energy reserves. She easily imbued her pets with magic to continue using them to launch powerful attacks. Daisy's specialty was frost magic, which she mastered to perfection through practice. So it wasn't difficult for her to create another powerful spell that was difficult to counter. As a result, almost all of the enemy's animals were buried under thick layers of ice. Ciel had no idea how her rival had managed to cast such powerful magic until now. But Daisy's pets were also accidentally hit, as these forces were uncontrollable. Rally, who had already started to root for the Frost Healer, was the most upset about this. However, as before, Daisy had everything under control, as she had thought through her actions in advance. So the girl quickly healed her pets, as they provided her with good support. Everyone around held their breath, watching the incredible battle between two powerful sorceresses. No matter how powerful Daisy's moves were, Ciel never thought of giving up so quickly and easily. The fire sorceress's attempts to break ahead were full of despair and greed for victory. But for every attack from her opponent, Daisy had a way to defend herself. So she reflected everything. The girl wasn't even half exhausted yet, since she had been training her magic since childhood. So soon she unleashed another powerful attack that completely swept away all the opponents in her path. Although this battle was a training session, Daisy did not let her guard down for a second. In this situation, Ciel's pets didn't even have time to blink before they found themselves encased in ice. Their alarmed cry became a signal to the owner that she could soon lose. The girl didn't have a single move left that she could use in battle. This is how Ciel had to admit her defeat, no matter how much she wanted to win. This was a good lesson for the sorceress, who often remained arrogant and rude. Daisy showed her how she should behave in order to be sure of victory at the end of the battle. Of course, none of the girls held a grudge against each other after the fight ended. Rally was especially delighted after what she saw, as she loved such events, while James realized that school battles were nothing compared to these. At this point, Rally left Lena, as she still had a lot of things to do after this fun fight. The guy realized that he was nowhere near the level he had shown in the ring. Among his plants, there were only a few medicinal herbs, but even they remained too weak. The only good solution for the hero now was to take his time and develop calmly. So he returned home, where for some reason his pets were glued to the brand new computer. At that moment, the young man did not notice anything strange, since the cat managed to hide everything. However, a small suspicion still settled inside James, although he put it aside for later. The pets had indeed been hiding something harmless from their owner, and were now not ready to admit anything. They were lucky that Lin just wanted to order a few more items to boost sales and creatures. The required parcels were delivered soon, as the online store worked very quickly. There were so many parcels that the delivery man had to ask one of his assistants for help. Leo couldn't even imagine that his master had money again, which he quickly spent. Friends noticed too late that the young delivery girl was doing a very poor job. The result was that the goldfish was suddenly under threat even before it entered the house. The creature was only weak in spirit, and would hardly have been able to survive such a fall. Only at the last moment did Leo manage to catch the aquarium, although he didn't really like drops of water. But the cat didn't notice that the fish was no longer inside, as it had safely fallen out. Who would have thought that Shabay's reaction would be enough to save this situation? Of course, James was treated to numerous apologies from the delivery guy, even though nothing bad had happened. While the guy himself was looking forward to the moment when he could use the new products, Lin had to come up with an activity for the pets so that they wouldn't feel lonely. Because the guy was planning to raise fish, which takes a lot of time, from the very beginning, the spirit seemed to reject the guy's energy, although it did nothing bad to him. And in the end, it was only after several hours that James was able to raise the fish by at least one level. All this was nothing compared to the rapid increase in levels in any plants. However, the young man was already glad that the fish quickly took root in his space with Mobius. The spirit was tired of being alone most of the time, and then such entertainment appeared for him. But even this was not enough for the hero, who dreamed of becoming strong as quickly as possible. The more a guy achieved, the more he was eager to move on to the next goal or level. Mobius tried to calm the greedy owner as best he could. But what could the spirit explain to a selfish person? So soon, the hero occupied the assistant's space with new creatures for development. James had long noticed that in this dimension, energy was consumed almost 5 times less. So soon, he had a huge army of spiders, each of which he leveled up. Lin was so happy at that moment that he completely forgot to check how things were going in the store. So the guy didn't immediately notice that some suspicious deposits had appeared on his account. A guess pierced the sharp mind of the young man, who had not been following the activities of his assistants all this time. And this time he really caught them at the most inopportune moment, Since the cat hadn't hidden anything, James had no intention of giving up on the investigation until he learned that his assistants had set up a channel. There, Sheba sang beautifully under the guise of a sweet girl, which is why she received small donations from people. Of course, all this happened under the supervision of the overly smart cat who came up with this idea. The hero hadn't seen the bird so happy for a long time, so he didn't say anything to his pets. He always believed that it was useful to pursue a hobby if it also brought in money. This is how Shecheba and Leo received permission to do what they had hidden from their master for so long. So they happily ignored all the other instructions from the master. The bird and the cat quickly found new entertainment for themselves. But for some reason, this one stayed with them for a long time. Once the situation with the pets was resolved, the hero returned to leveling up the creatures. What upset the young man most was that everything came down to his own small level. No matter how hard James tried, he couldn't speed up his development. So every time he was faced with the need to first pump up a useful spirit. It was not without reason that Lin was in a hurry with the experiments, because he had lost a lot of time during the years of inactivity. But now there were so many ideas in the hero's head that he did not have time to implement each of them. That's why he first called Shaylee, who could get almost any product. The woman was once again surprised that her client needed expensive items. She was over the moon to finally land a wealthy buyer. But in reality, James didn't have the money for the goods he needed to level up. So the hero had to buy something less necessary, but at least something that fit in his wallet. However, the woman was confident that Lin would soon place a large order with her again. Mobius wasn't too pleased with his master's rush to level up, but he enjoyed watching James get better at his tasks. Soon, several more fish arrived to him, which he planned to improve in the future. Despite the addition to the pool, there was still enough space for other magical fish. But Mobius knew that soon the goldfish would begin to compete for survival. Only now did the hero realize that the instinct for self-preservation was strong even within harmless creatures. So the spirit faced a difficult task, because now the fish would compete with each other. The only thing that made the hero happy was that he had bought enough food for every nervous creature. It was at that moment that James noticed that someone had bought all the plants in his store. Who would have thought that one day Lin would live to see the moment when he didn't have to worry about money? To meet the buyer in person, the guy rushed into the store's virtual space, and he arrived just in time to catch two clients he had never seen before arguing. For some reason, the girl was very unhappy with the behavior of the man, who remained surprisingly calm. To quickly resolve the quarrel, the hero had to release all the spiders from the magic cubes. At the sight of such a good army, the clients immediately fell silent, although they were more surprised than scared. Even at first glance, it was clear to them that these animals were of a high standard and quality, so it was logical that the girl and the man became interested in purchasing these animals. But the hero summoned the spiders only to intimidate, since they were all sold to Rally. And it worked. As customers became interested in purchasing at least some product from the seller, the young man could only offer them a pre-order for a goldfish, which he planned to release soon. In response, the customers immediately began arguing among themselves about who would buy the animal first. So the hero had to remind everyone once again that quarrels were unacceptable in his store. That's how Layla and Justin pretended that they weren't arguing anymore, even though they were looking at each other angrily. Their noisy example showed James that he needed to implement store etiquette. Justin soon left, having managed to buy all the plants. But Layla, for some reason, stayed behind. It turned out that the girl was interested in whether the merchant could cure one of her animals. The thing was, Layla only looked young, but her daughter already had her own favorite pet. The hero couldn't even imagine that this girl would have not only a creature, but also a child. Meanwhile, Layla happily showed off a creature that urgently needed serious help. James had never seen a spirit in such a deplorable state before. It turned out that the tree creature was attacked by a fire demon, which is why the spirit received such damage. No matter how much the girl wanted to get help, her conscience ate her up, because she had no money at all. Lin had a solution for this situation, as he just needed one product. And for Layla, this was real luck, because she had a lot of such things in her business. Who would have thought that a lady who looks so young also has connections? Even Chaylee was unable to get the magic earth, so the hero was very lucky. But the guy was already thinking that he would have to go to a store of rare goods, which only existed in reality. But now his life was much easier, because Layla looked like a person who kept her promises. As soon as Rally received the message about the ready-made spiders, She immediately rushed to the store. The girl immediately appreciated the quality of the animals that the guy had prepared for her. Although she did not like these creatures, she was obliged to cooperate with them because of her peculiarities. James was obliged to warn the customer, as a joke, that some spiders have venom. This topic still remained a sore point for Raleigh, although her hair gradually began to grow back. Thanks to Mylene's timely payment, the hero's affairs were getting better and better every day. But the guy still carefully approached the expansion of production so that there would be no problems in the future. Even the cat found something to do in this area, as he diligently studied all the new information. Soon its production reached such a level that the hero could barely keep up with purchases. But training the cat was difficult, as he still didn't understand many things. In such situations, the young man always tried to explain difficult material to his student in understandable words. And now the conversation turned to the complexity of the evolution of creatures, for which the hero had no concrete example. But he remembered in time that he could show Leo the very plants that he had been developing. James was curious about what options the cat would offer for the evolution of such a plant. As the boy expected, the cat would have preferred the plant to be protected and unpretentious in life. But Lin knew of a much better option for the path of plant evolution, which made him burst with pride. At first glance, the cat's theory seemed good, but in reality, everything was arranged more complexly. So far, the pet did not have the level of development to offer other solutions to the problem. So James himself suggested to him that every plant was trying to attract attention to itself. If it were a cactus, no one would want to grow it like a tender and juicy herb. As soon as the training was completed, the young man went for a walk with his beloved pets. It was at this moment that he came across an advertisement about how one could immediately obtain the second rank of a mage. This was good news for James, who now had enough strength for official status. But the next advertisement struck the young man so much that he forgot about all his affairs that day. The conversation was about representatives of the suppression of spirits who had been fighting with rifts all their lives. At the sight of their tokens, the hero immediately remembered his childhood, when his parents were still alive. One evening, they went off to do dangerous work at night, and the guy never saw them again. From that very moment on, he had to urgently grow up for the sake of his little sister, Emily. At that time, the hero did not yet know what dangerous work his mother and father were doing around the clock. But he remembered for the rest of his life those very tokens that remained at work after their death. Only now did James realize that his parents were in the spirit-fighting forces. He didn't tell his pets anything so as not to worry them with unnecessary details. However, that same night, Lin couldn't sleep due to anxiety, so he went looking for information. As the boy had expected, exactly on the day of his parents' death, a portal with spirits opened. Evil creatures, with which it was impossible to establish contact, immediately crawled out of every crack. But the most terrifying thing was not even their number, but their gigantic size and terrible abilities. What frightened the hero most was the insect, which managed to take the lives of many magicians along with itself. All these years, James had no idea what a dangerous job his family was working in. Most likely, it was in this same profession that Uncle Mayer received his injuries, although he kept silent. What hurt Lin the most was that no one tried to tell him the truth, while the parents' tokens were no different from those now worn by the spirit suppressors. This work was always dangerous and difficult. So many left it early, but James's mom and dad didn't have time to leave before some creature brutally killed them. There were so many questions spinning in the hero's head that he couldn't sit still without answers. But an internet search yielded nothing, as all information was banned. Lin learned of his parents' profession and became sad, because he knew nothing about them. But the hero's requests did not go unnoticed by the organizations. So soon, there was a knock on his door. Usually, even James's aunt and uncle didn't visit at such a time, so he immediately suspected something was wrong. But the hero didn't have time to put any protection on the store in case the enemies arrived. But he was concerned about the safety of his pets, whom he asked not to go near the door. James would not want to lose either the cat or the bird, even if he was able to cure them. Since he didn't have any alarm, the guy carefully opened the front door. From their form, he immediately guessed that these were not ordinary people in front of him, but that they also knew him. The whole thing was that Lin reminded the Spirit Suppression Bureau of his presence when he started looking for information. And now Cicely and Dan have arrived to talk to their colleague's son after so many years. The man and woman knew Lin's parents well, having spent time with them in battle. All James wanted to know from them was what exactly had happened to his family many years ago. It was the hardest thing for Dan to tell the truth, as he personally knew many of the victims. As soon as the young man saw his mother's handwriting on the handkerchief, he felt tears welling up in his eyes. But the guy couldn't allow himself to show emotions, because he had to continue the dialogue with people. Dan seemed like a good person to him because he had won his trust almost immediately with his behavior. In fact, the hero didn't even think of being offended by anyone because they didn't tell him the truth. If he had learned the details of his parents' tragic death earlier, he might not have been able to bear it. In fact, Cicely and Dan didn't just come to James because they wanted to express their condolences. Along with this, they took several things from the bureau that should have been given to the guy a long time ago. It turned out that one of the parents' items was a rare rift seed that had appeared many years ago. Cicely hoped that the young man would use this thing, which improved people's levels, wisely. Lin didn't even dare hope that he would ever get his hands on such a valuable item. He was so surprised by such a gift that he could not find the words to thank the guests. James had heard many times that such seeds were very harmful in terms of care, but he was lucky. And Cicely just happened to have instructions on how to care for this thing. The most profitable thing for the hero was to develop this seed into some kind of high-class healing creature. As the hero watched Daisy, he realized that this battle strategy was perfect for him. But what surprised the hero most was that the man and woman had prepared money for him. Of course, the guy wasn't going to take anything from them, because he didn't consider them guilty of anything. Besides, James now had a wonderful family, and therefore, he did not need anything. It just turned out that Dan had much more stubbornness than the hero initially thought. So the man insisted that the boy accept money from him as an apology. Cicely was of the same opinion, as they had not visited their colleague's son for a long time. The woman was worried that Lin's energy was too weak for his age, so she couldn't leave without offering the young man the opportunity to visit their bureau. James welcomed this idea with joy, as it opened up new horizons for him. The guy was finally convinced that both agents could be completely trusted. Seeing Lin's desire, even Dan couldn't refuse him, although he considered this journey difficult. However, the agreement was made, so the woman called upon her spirit being for the journey. It turned out to be a huge owl that could easily cover any distance. It was no surprise that her level was one of the highest since she served as an agent. Dan had no further reason to object, since everything had been decided without his opinion. So the hero, along with his pets, went to the bureau, where he never even dreamed of ever visiting. They were not only to look at the organization, but also to fly within the rift itself. James knew how dangerous this undertaking was, but he believed in the power of the two agents. Since every soldier knew Cicely and Dan, they were allowed into the dimension without any problems. And soon the space around changed dramatically as soon as the allies entered the rift itself. Leo and Shebby reacted poorly to the huge amount of sounds that were inside the dimension, while the hero himself was worried about small creatures that immediately noticed the prey. However, the guy didn't even have to move, as Dan crushed the evil creature in time. For the first time in his life, James saw for himself how powerful magicians all the agents were. For Cicely, all these creatures were of such a low level that she did not pay attention to them. Even without the help of his partner, Dan deftly dealt with all the creatures that tried to attack. As a defense, he deployed the most powerful spirit in the collection to ensure that no one could get close to them. He was a powerful purple wolf who had good attacking skills. Even though there was only one wolf, Dan had complete confidence in its strength and abilities. Only this magical animal was capable of summoning an entire flock in case of danger. James immediately noticed how amazing the skills of just one wolf were. The question remained, how strong were all the other pets of the powerful wizard? But Dan wasn't used to revealing all the secrets right away, because there was nothing interesting about it. While the hero was distracted by the agent's presentation, his pets noticed something amiss in the area. All this time, the raven watched them closely, although for some reason it did not take action. But Lin didn't see any danger because he was next to the agents the whole time. However, Shichebe still raised the alarm, and it turned out that the three of them were left completely alone, while the raven suddenly flew closer, as it was he who was working his magic. None of the agents noticed the fact that James had been sucked into a completely different dimension. There were a lot of crows flying around, which distracted Cicely and Dan's attention, so the woman was unable to feel the strange energy that began to emanate from young Lin. She continued to protect his body while the hero's consciousness was captured by the dark raven, while the man was carefully watching the surroundings and also did not look in James's direction. It was only after some time that Cicely realized that the guy had not moved for a long time. But from the outside, It looked as if Lin was simply tired and therefore fell asleep. Although in reality, somewhere deep in the raven's subconscious, the hero was falling downwards at a rapid speed. Shade tried her best to break her fall. But what could one little bird do? So soon the whole company was supposed to collide with the land from the rift dimension. Despite falling from a height, the hero landed so softly, as if he hadn't even moved. But James had no time to be surprised because he wasn't supposed to be in this place. It turned out that the raven caught the guy only to take him with him if he lost. The beast understood his capabilities well, so he prepared a powerful army against the youth. Before the hero could even say a word, Shebe boldly rushed into battle to protect him from danger. The pets had recently leveled up, so they were confident that they could win. But the raven didn't just drag them into his space for no reason, because he had many skills in reserve. So, after just a few minutes, Shechebe and Leo found themselves in an unpleasant trap from a magical creature. The pet's level was not sufficient to break out of hypnosis on its own, but a hero came to their aid, who had good control over the situation around him. James easily recognized the raven's illusions, as Mobius helped him in this place as well. The evil bird clearly didn't expect that the weak guy would turn out to be much stronger than she thought. However, retreating was not in her nature, so the creature once again called upon the wolves for help. This time, it was clear to Lin that the threat no longer resembled a mere illusion to the mind. The animals emitted such a vicious energy that you didn't want to go within a kilometer of them, but the young man still had no other choice, so he had to fight them. Shejeb bravely flashed in front of the enemy's noses, thereby attracting their attention to herself. No matter how many times the wolves tried to attack, they always missed at the very last moment. All this only made the animals even more angry, as they were used to easily catching any prey. James knew that he could never have fought such a powerful beast alone. The raven pulled only him into its space, since Lin was several times weaker than the two agents. And now the creature did everything possible to keep the guy near itself forever. Raven had a genuine hatred for all the people who occupied such a beautiful world. That is why he periodically drew the weakest to himself in the hope that he could defeat them. The hero's pets really couldn't do anything against the powerful and strong wolves. There were so many wolves that the raven no longer doubted victory, although he rarely celebrated in the midst of battle. The creature saw that his opponent's pets had already surrendered, and therefore did not hold back his emotions. But a drop of the hero's blood accidentally fell on the seed of the rift, after which it gave it unprecedented power. This helped James instantly bring his pets back to their senses, as their strength was almost exhausted. But now they were oversaturated with energy, which emanated from the seed in huge quantities. The speed at which Leo and Shejebe moved would have been the envy of any high-quality runner. But the raven believed that he could finally ruin the life of at least one member of humanity. He deliberately chose the weakest target, but this did not save the bird from the attack of the awakened hero. Soon, the guy finally opened his eyes. Otherwise, Dan began to worry about his condition in the rift. James had no intention of telling the agents the truth so that they wouldn't worry about him. Cicely and Dan were good guys, although they didn't notice any changes in Lena. But for the hero, this journey was so useful that he did not want to spoil it in any way. So the guy wasn't going to tell anyone about the raven he left in that place? As soon as they returned home, Leo and Shechebe immediately lay down on the bed, as they were very tired. But the hero couldn't sleep because of the events he had experienced, so he tended to the rift seed. The guy didn't know exactly why it suddenly worked, but he remembered that the semen was partially saturated with blood. So it was logical to assume that it was with this that it was activated and gave power. The hero acted purely intuitively when he gave the seed a few more drops of his blood. But he did everything right, because soon a powerful and bright aura appeared around the seed. Now they were bound by a contract, and the young man could hear the loud voice of the seed in his head. As a result, James shed blood until he was completely exhausted, but there was little semen. Luckily, one of the healing flowers was right next to the hero, so he quickly felt better. But he was able to awaken the seed, which grew into a rather unusual and rare plant. Lin was pleased with the work he had done, even though it had taken a lot of effort out of him. From now on, his company had a new addition in the form of Shippy, who was smiling with all his fangs. But the plant turned out to be surprisingly picky and didn't eat everything its owner offered it. For a long time, the guy tried to find at least some element that Sheepy would agree to. He did not want to sacrifice his blood to the plant again, as it was very exhausting for the young man. At exactly that moment, Leo came into the room, having been awakened by his master's morning actions. Lin was glad to see his assistant fully recovered, as they were very tired in the rift. Leo was naturally inquisitive, so he quickly showed interest in the new plant. In fact, the cat still dreamed of becoming stronger, watching how Lin increased the levels of creatures. But the hero felt that his pets were not yet ready for another promotion. So, no matter how hard the bird begged the owner, he did not change his decision on this matter. James didn't want to take any risks, so he preferred to gradually increase the levels of his friends. And soon the moment came when Leo and Shibe were ready to improve. During this time, the hero also improved his abilities, so he should have been able to cope much faster. He was the first to begin improving Shiba, since the bird could no longer sit still from impatience. Each time she was excited by this magical process, during which she was filled with new strength. At the very end, James again had to choose the direction in which the bird's forces would go. This time, the hero approached his choice more carefully, since they had not yet coped well with battles. So for Chap, he chose the ability to control the weather, which was good against elemental opponents. Leo was especially delighted with the improvement of the bird, which he loved like his own sister. So it was no surprise that the cat perked up before the upgrade, since he too would have new strength. But Leo's level up didn't go so smoothly and quickly. Although the cat endured until the very end, the pet constantly felt as if the aura around him was filled with tickling and was bothering him. As a result, Leo evolved immediately after sneezing, which greatly surprised his young owner. After the upgrade, the cat's appearance became much better, as the level directly affected it. Once again, James was faced with the choice of a new ability to give to the cat. Leo himself insisted that he wanted to learn how to transform into some special and useful object. But the hero wasn't at all sure that anything good would come out of this choice. But the cat desperately insisted on his own, as it seemed to him that this decision would bring great benefit. In the end, Lin did not argue with his assistant, whose eyes were filled with a spark of stubbornness and tenacity. As soon as the guy chose the ability, Leo turned into glasses that analyzed everything around him. That's how James learned that his new friend Shippy wanted to feast on anomalous creatures. Of course, where else could the hero look for all these goods except from the store owner, Chaley? The woman could get her hands on almost anything, which the guy used at every opportunity. The more Madame collaborated with James, the more questions she had about his orders. However, Lin had no time for following the rules, as he was interested in the development of his pets. The guy didn't put too much bet on Shippy liking the food. However, the pet suddenly ate everything offered with such passion, as if it were a delicacy in front of him. But what amazed the young man most was that after this, the plant suddenly began to evolve successfully. The plant's new abilities turned out to be so useful that the hero forgave it for its gluttony. So Shippy continued to eat all the food that was bought for the week without any problems. It became clear that if you don't feed the plant, it will start looking at those around it. So James rushed to replenish his food orders, of which he had purchased a small quantity. It was only because of this that the guy noticed that for some reason he had too much money on his balance. He could not have imagined that sales of his creatures would bring in so much profit in such a short time. Of course, there was a price to pay from Raleigh, who demanded a new batch of spiders as soon as possible. After development, the pets did not leave their owner's side, wanting to walk everywhere with him from now on. Leo and Chap were eager to test their skills, as they had learned a lot during this time. James himself was interested to see what his beloved friends could show. He evolved quickly enough to fight the creatures at the next rift. When the boy learned the truth about his parents' death, he wanted to continue their difficult path. But for now, he still had a lot to go through, so the hero peacefully continued his shopping. This time, he arrived at a time when the employees were for some reason arguing with the store owner. The hero did not immediately reveal his presence, as he was interested in observing people. But Shaylee soon noticed such an important client and immediately broke into a joyful smile. Just like last time, James made a huge order because he had a lot of money again. None of Moran's assistants expected that such a rich and young man would come to them. As soon as they realized who was in front of them, the assistant's expressions immediately changed, and Shaylee didn't miss the opportunity to show Lin the new products she had just recently acquired. The hero just had a lot of space in the Mobius space, so he could afford new goods. This time, James was ready to leave all his money in the store, just to buy everything he needed. The assistants did not leave the rich client's side until the very end, since few people came to them. As soon as the hero finished shopping, he moved on to the next plan. The gist of it was that the guy wanted to try his hand at the magic tower. James had heard a lot about the difficulty of the randomly generated tests. However, Leo and Shichebe were with him, so the young man was not afraid of possible difficulties along the way. The only thing that upset James was the complicated registration process for the fights, which he still had to wait for. But soon Lin went to the assistant who was assessing the fighting abilities of all the pets in front of the tower. He made a sarcastic remark about the hero's set, but the cat and the bird decided that they were being complimented. Shijeb was generally sure that only the 100th level of the tower was suitable for her to fight. The assistant had already encountered more than once such naive fools who thought that the tower was light, so he didn't believe that the wizard in front of him would be able to reach even the 10th level. The hero felt awkward at such contempt, but he did not enter into open conflict with the guy. Preparation for battles consisted of everyone being able to choose the conditions and level of difficulty for themselves. And soon the hero's first opponent appeared on the display, looking like a very weak grandfather. James had read a lot of comic books about duels, so he tried to act like a brave opponent. But Leo did not appreciate the efforts of the owner, because he understood that the opponent was too weak for him. The old man released his brave pet, on whom he bet in every tower battle. But the cat managed to deal with the beetle, which was barely larger than an ant, with one paw. This is how the first victory was achieved. But Leo was not at all happy about its quick achievement. At higher levels, the hero began to encounter opponents who could at least put up a fight. James only sent Shichebe into battle, while he himself walked everywhere with Leo, wearing the analytical glasses. The birdie dealt with her opponents perfectly well even without the cat's help, since she had leveled up well. So it was no surprise to James that no one could win them. After each round, Lin returned to the main hall and reselected the conditions for the battle. They went through everything so easily that the pets lost the desire to continue participating in battles. Leo really wanted to show off all his abilities, but so far he hasn't had the opportunity. But James understood that sooner or later they would have to face a stern and powerful enemy. And finally, they came across Tony Dune, who had 3 powerful pets at once. When Leo and Shichebe saw his profile, they were delighted that they were finally about to have a real battle. But James himself was not so joyful, because he understood that the enemy was dangerous. In addition to strength, Tony also possessed narcissism, which became evident from his first word. Dune did not hesitate to laugh loudly at James, who outwardly seemed weaker than him. For the first time in his life, the hero met a guy so impudent that he judged others by first impressions. Tony could talk endlessly about how powerful and wonderful a wizard he was, but Lin had no desire to listen to all this any longer, so he hurried to start the fight. The boy's analysis showed that Dune's carelessness had also been passed on to his 3 magical animals, so the hero had a real opportunity to deliver a good blow, while no one believed in him yet. Sheba carried out her first attack brilliantly, as she had long since figured out how the skills worked. But the snakes blocked everything with a protective fog, which added to the difficulty for young James. Tony was prepared for any situation, despite the fact that on the outside he seemed stupid and careless. But Shicheb did not miss the opportunity to deliver another powerful blow to the opponent's pets. But there were still more snakes, so soon the bird began to slowly give way. James couldn't let the cat out into battle, still analyzing the situation before his nose. But soon the hero managed to open the Mobius space, which filled Shichebe with energy. From now on, Lin was not afraid of Tony's attacks, since there was still a lot of magic in his dimension. But no matter how much the hero tried to be brave, Dune paid no attention to all his efforts. The guy only poured more strength into the snakes, who had to defeat their opponents at any cost. So, after a few more minutes, Shebe began to gradually give in under the powerful onslaught of enemies. A little more and James could have lost, but the cat suddenly gave out useful information to his friends. All this time he scanned the enemies and realized that they had several weak points at once. The fight began with renewed vigor, as Shijebi now aimed precisely at the points indicated by the cat. But Dune wasn't afraid of this, since he also knew about his pet's weak points. The guy was confident that the snakes would cope with any difficulty because he had invested a lot in their enhancements. But James was much better at controlling Shebi's actions, so they soon had a chance to attack. As soon as the enemy opened up, the bird used all its strength to create a powerful attack. The snakes were unprepared for Shebe's cunning, which used their own attack against their opponents. As a result, Such a huge explosion occurred in the field that the snakes did not have time to hide from it. Tony clearly didn't expect that some funny little bird could put up such a good fight. It was painful for Dune to realize the fact that he had lost to some young opponent in his very first fight. James was not just lucky, because from the very beginning he was wary of the enemy's skills. At that moment, Tony remembered how much he had been afraid of losing all this time because of his cruel father. His figure still loomed menacingly over Dune, so he couldn't give up so quickly, despite the snake's condition. With the last of his strength, the young man began to take measures that could lead him to victory. But the advantage was now on James's side, so he skillfully helped Sheba avoid all attacks. Now that Leo had fully scanned the animals, it was easy for the bird to hit their weak spots. She twisted and turned in the air so dexterously, as if she herself were made entirely of air currents. So all the snake attacks did not bring any results, but only caused more harm to them. While Shichebi remained completely safe, since it was difficult to reach her, Lin already felt the sweet taste of victory, which he had achieved through hard and exhausting work. Sensing that he was about to lose, Tony began to insult his opponent by saying that he was using dirty methods. But initially, James was at a disadvantage, because Dune released 3 snakes against him. So, by using the Mobius space, the hero only equalized the opponent's chances of victory. The spirit dimension effectively saturated Shicheba with energy, so the bird hardly felt tired. In fact, Tony used the words as a diversionary tactic as he prepared to attack. All this time, he had been preparing one snake, and now Shichebe was in danger. Only at the last moment did the bird manage to escape the blow, although the snake almost caught up with it in flight. Dune did not feel a drop of regret, as he always believed that any means were necessary to win. Only now did James realize how impudent and difficult an opponent he had encountered. He poured all his last strength into the bird, just so that it would not be harmed in the battle. But even this was not enough, because after the owner's meanness, the snakes began to attack more strongly. But soon Shichiba managed to deceive one of the snakes, and at the same time, escape all of his attacks. The pet was no longer able to move, as it had received too many severe wounds in the battle. But Tony did not admit defeat, because he had never lost to weak magicians before. Memories of his father again clouded the boy's mind, and he decided to perform the most difficult spell. The snakes had no right to disobey their master, even though that weapon caused them significant harm in the process. But they still united into a single whole, turning into a completely new creature. This time, Tony's attack was especially brutal, as he did not even spare his pets. The guy developed this technique for the most extreme cases, but now he decided that the time had come. The most terrible thing was that the transformation took very little time for the animals. The spectacle presented unpleasant images of how pets should not be treated. But Tony didn't care about the well-being of his assistants, since it was more important to him to defeat James in battle. Dune was always proud of this form of evolution, which his relatives had worked on for many years. The hero immediately felt changes in the enemy's aura that did not bode well for him. But it soon turned out that the snakes did not pose much of a danger, as they attacked themselves. It quickly became apparent, and James couldn't help but take advantage of such a good opportunity to win. So, on his orders, Shicheb dealt the final blow to Tony's pets, who was too overconfident. As a result, the guy did not have a single spell left to continue the fight. Although the opponent was not easy, this time Lin managed to win with the help of tactics. However, the young man did not plan to climb the tower anymore, as his pets were very tired. The hero himself felt worn out, since he had expended a large amount of energy, so he didn't pay attention to one of the magicians who was looking for a worthy opponent. This man did not act of his own free will, as he was ordered to find someone strong. James fit all the criteria for a wizard, but he refused to fight again. So the unknown person never learned the full extent of the hero's power, even though it was almost exhausted after the battle with Tony. This is because Lin planned to gradually achieve improvements, rather than trying to complete the entire tower at once. Each time, Mobius eagerly awaited the moment when the owner would come to his space for a pumping session. But this time, the hero relied not on his own abilities, but on the powers of the magical fish. Even at this level, fish were selling well in his shop, so it would be useful to improve them. For this occasion, James had just bought a rare mixture that consisted of real dragon's blood. The boy wasn't entirely sure what effect the potion would have on the goldfish. As soon as the animal felt the new energy, it immediately began to change its shape. It was clear that the fish was having a hard time enduring the magical power of the blood that came from the dragon. So the creature still underwent evolution, and the hero could only watch from the side. Periodically, the guy maintained the energy that splashed in all directions from the fish, and soon the creature finally hatched from the egg. But James didn't even notice it right away. The fish had transformed so much that its own mother would never have recognized it. All the fish around also celebrated this magical event, because they would like the same promotion for themselves. But James had his eyes set on this fish from the very beginning, as it seemed more suitable to him. As usual, the young man didn't know which upgrade to choose for the animal after leveling up, and in the end, he settled on the healing ability, since he still had to build up his power. Before, Lin could never even dream of acquiring even one such powerful creature. All this time, the guy was so concentrated on the fish that he did not notice the changes in Mobius. It was a real discovery for him that the spirit now began to resemble a human even more. During the transformation, the assistant lost so much energy that he needed a good night's sleep, but James was already happy that the space around him had become larger, so he wasn't upset about it. Lin had always loved wide open spaces, so at this moment his joy knew no bounds. But what pleased the hero most was the emergence of a healing barrier that could save him from death. If something happens to one of the guy's pets, he can place them here until he gets them cured. In the future, this property could bring great benefit to the hero who planned to fight. With each increase, he felt more and more magical energy penetrating into him. The boy's appetite for magic grew, so soon he began to look at high-level beasts. Mobius was not opposed to the master's zeal, but he understood that he had limitations. So far, James's powers were not enough to summon the goldfish into reality. But Lin believed that in the future there would be no such obstacles for him, because he would raise his level. Surprisingly, the spirit was of the same opinion, since the gentleman seemed talented to him. In a short time, a warm and friendly relationship developed between Mobius and James, and this was another reason for Lin to strive to raise the assistant's level. The hero was not sad that the spirit was going into hibernation, because he had a lot of his own things to do. Now he had 2 healing creatures, so the guy could become calmer for a while. But he still didn't know what to do with Shippy, who ate too much for his size. But James needed a lot of money to maintain his zoo, so he couldn't sit still. So, for the next few weeks, the guy immersed himself in improving animals and plants. He easily sold them to anyone who wanted them, since he kept only the best copies for himself. So the young man was doing well in his trade, as he had regular customers like Raleigh. However, no one has canceled out the enormous strain on the body, even if James has improved his endurance. But the morning procedures helped Lin look a little better, although they did not cure him completely. While the hero was young and full of strength, he could afford to overload his body. The young man received most of his useful information from Leo, who greatly developed his abilities. The higher James leveled up, the rarer materials he needed to level up. Even if Chaley couldn't get the product a client needed, she always pointed them in the right direction. And tonight, Leo went with his master in search of high-quality meat. Shippy had been demanding more food for days now, so Lin hadn't come up with another idea. Although the store owner warned James about the danger, she did not tell him all the details, so Lin was unprepared to meet 3 huge guys who looked warlike. It seemed the guy had come to the right place in the port, where citizens of the country rarely came. He just wanted to buy goods that couldn't be purchased in official stores. But I still ran into an obstacle in the form of guys who denied the existence of a black market. The assistants were unable to hide information, so they soon confessed what they had been doing. For the first time in his life, the hero felt so awkward around other adults. It seemed that these people listened only to themselves and their thoughts, and acted accordingly. Suddenly, they wanted to test James's skills, so they released their pets on him. But Lin didn't even bother trying, since Leo could easily deal with each of them. And so, after a few minutes, the cat won, despite the fact that there were many more enemies. Only the appearance of Mr. Humphrey saved James from further problems with the boys. The man could do nothing about the stupid assistants who constantly ruined his business. Only these guys agreed to work with him, although they always managed to do something wrong. The last time they brought meat from the rift instead of good goods, for which Humphrey was angry with them. No one expected that such a product would suit James, because Shippy ate almost everything. This is how the gentleman managed to get rid of the unnecessary goods, so he gave the client a discount. Lin had nothing to lose, so he agreed to the meat from the rift, since Shippy needed something to feed. Since the plant was always very hungry, The guy bought the entire batch from Mr. Humphrey. Miyamo emitted a harmful corrosion for everyone, and the hero was not sure that it would not harm Shippy. But the plant didn't even think before swallowing the whole bucket of food. James's worst fears were confirmed as the plant's aura instantly became unstable. Suddenly, all the damage disappeared as Shippy suddenly started evolving after eating. Leo couldn't predict this effect from the meat, so now they didn't know what to do. But soon Shippy himself safely reached a new stage, having survived the fatal damage from corrosion. Finally, the plant calmed down for a while, since it did not consume food only in its sleep. Its appearance also changed, bringing new abilities to the food-hungry plant from the rift. James was prepared for Shippy to sleep for a long time before he finally came to his senses. The hero had never been able to live without news, and this time, Shibe impressed him with her signature. The bird has created a huge crowd of fans on the internet, and now she tries so hard for them. Shiba was able to make a good living from this, although he had to face disdain from his friends. James did not interfere with his assistant's development, because she enjoyed this work so much, but he couldn't devote much time to his friends, as the exam for a magician was about to begin. If in previous years the young man didn't even look in that direction, this time he came with pleasure. Besides him, many other candidates attended the exam in the hope that they would be able to improve their level. Everyone prepared diligently for the tests, realizing that their future depended on it. Leonora Dabi, the granddaughter of the chief examiner, watched the candidates from the sidelines, while Ning Dabi was communicating with his assistants, who were telling him how to run the company. But these two men never advised anything that went against their own gain. The old man had long since remembered that these people could not be trusted. But because of their status, he kept them around. This time, one of the men remembered that the ruler wanted to choose a student for herself. They hoped to put forward their candidates and subsequently receive a reward from them. Ning merely nodded his head silently in response to all their suggestions, although he had no intention of approving anything. Meanwhile, the hero was still flying to the exam building, having decided to use the new transport. There was a slight feeling of excitement inside James from the very morning, but he was ready for anything. Lin tried to support the cat, who would play a decisive role in his exam. The hero himself knew little information about the world of magic, but he was sure that Leo remembered almost everything. Along the way, they met many wizards who almost died from excitement. Their emotions were understandable, since they would only be able to retake the promotion exam in a year. James himself was not really worried, as it was his first test and everything was still ahead. Before the test began, a huge crowd of those who wanted to show off their abilities awaited them. The rules did not prohibit taking assistance with him, so Lin resorted to such a trick. To remain unnoticed, Leo took the form of glasses, and now only the owner could hear him. At this point, Leonora was still supporting those who had already failed the first wave of tests. The girl felt sorry for the wizards who couldn't get through, and she supported them with all her might. James didn't expect that such a young and beautiful girl would be the one assigning him to the test. He didn't have any identification with him, so the guy had to undergo testing in front of the chief. The hero was not afraid of a large number of theoretical questions because he had a cat with him. But Leonora didn't know about the stranger's secret assistant, so she warned him about the difficulty of the test. Dabi tried to dissuade James from taking on the most difficult tests until the very end, but nothing worked. So the girl had to come to terms with the fact that her grandfather would soon personally check this man. Meanwhile, the head's assistants were confident that the old man would definitely listen to them. They were already dreaming about how they would soon be able to take his place among this huge company. The men even hid from each other the fact that they were going to betray each other at the first opportunity. This time, the hero was lucky, and, following Leonora, he did not meet these terrible people. But soon, Ning stood in their way, having just finished talking with his cunning assistants. The old man loved his granddaughter so much that he didn't even maintain a formal relationship with her at work. No matter how much Leonora asked the head to behave differently, it was all absolutely useless. The old man began to behave more seriously only when he noticed a promising candidate in front of him. But as a joke, he first asked the hero a question that actually had no answer. Only the chief's granddaughter knew which ancient predator he considered the most powerful on the planet. The girl struggled to figure out how to discreetly suggest the correct answer to James in order to help. The old man really was counting on the only answer, the correctness of which he had long since become convinced of. But then Lin reminded that these two predators had long since become extinct, so they were both weak. If any creature were to be returned to its ancient form, it would not be able to survive long in the present time. The hero's answer pleased the old man so much that for some time he said nothing in response. For the first time in his life, Ning heard a version that did not resemble all the other explanations of this issue. James truly believed that animals that couldn't adapt were weak. Now, humans were the strongest species, as they had already survived on the planet for many centuries. The elder Dobby had no arguments against it, since he liked the boy for his intelligence. Even Leonora didn't expect that some unknown magician could impress her grandfather so much. As a result, the hero caught the eye of many, since Nin showed special attention to him. But the head quickly put an end to all discontent, since his opinion was decisive in any matter. This is how James easily got into the exam that many people had been preparing for many years of their lives. But it was not difficult for Lin to solve all the issues, since Leo knew almost all the information. Nin's favorite part was watching the mages working hard during the exam. Each test took several hours, so the crowd of people willing to take it never ended. That's why Lin stood out from the crowd when he answered all the questions in almost an hour. But suddenly, the head refused to take the exam from the young man, although he answered all the questions correctly. Life had not prepared the hero for such a turn of events, and he had not provided any backup plan. James couldn't believe that he had somehow miraculously failed one of the tests, even with the help of the cat. It turned out that the chief had such a high opinion of the young man's abilities that he would like to see him again tomorrow. It was only for this reason that he did not take the exam immediately, although Lin easily passed all the criteria. This is how James once again realized that not all of his plans were destined to come true right away. In fact, Ning had no plans to let go of the guy he liked for his intelligence. As a token of gratitude, the old man took the young man to a place he had only shown to a few people. The conversation was about a huge pool that kept all the secrets that the head of the company brought to it. Lena was shaken by the magical energy that was overflowing in this place. Dabe himself felt a slight excitement, since he did not visit this mysterious place every day. The reservoir was designed in such a way that it would not release the huge monster until the leader unlocked it. As soon as the old man cast the spell, the aura of that creature knocked the hero off his feet. Dobby spent more than half his life raising his beloved pet. Leo immediately told James how rare and dangerous this magical creature was. The only question that remained was why the old man hadn't raised the level of the magic shark yet. Although it took a while, Lin realized that Ning wanted to direct her evolution towards the megalodon. Usually, few people were able to make such changes, so James was interested in what the old man would show him. But the guy didn't expect that Ning would ask him to bring him real dragon blood. The guy had never held such a high-quality version of the dragon composition in his hands before. In his dreams, James had only just assumed that this was a gift for him, when the old man ruined everything. The thing was, he had been feeding the shark this blood for several months in the hopes of evolution. But the pet stubbornly stuck to its current appearance, as if it didn't want to look like an extinct shark. However, Ning had no intention of giving up. Even though he had been unable to do anything about his pet's evolution for many years, the old man personally escorted the young magician, whom he considered worthy of promotion to the second rank. But Dobby was used to not rushing to conclusions, so he postponed all decisions until the second day. At that moment, no one knew what a great future awaited the hero in a couple of years. Whenever James had free time, he always thought about what he could do. But this time, things found the guy themselves, as his beloved sister Emily suddenly called him. As soon as Lin heard that she was injured, he immediately rushed to her school. The hero thought that school was a safe place for his sister, but in the end, he was very wrong. However, Emily's injuries were so minor that her brother didn't even have to come. But James was still restless with worry, as his sister rarely called him. The girl was participating in a volleyball competition, and the ball accidentally hit her hand. Once Lin learned all the details of the situation, he didn't understand why Emily called him at all. The thing was that the girl needed help with a guy who was really embarrassing her. The unknown man's name was Ralph Lorrington, and he searched everywhere for true talent in magic. What James feared most was that the man would sense his hidden abilities, and Ralph really took an interest in the elder Lin because he had raised a fantastic bull. Leo actively hinted to the owner not to reveal any information to this scoundrel. James himself did not plan to reveal anything, although he did mention a short time frame for raising the bull. And this news greatly saddened Ralph, whose abilities were too slow to reveal the animals. Meanwhile, Marie Prompty, whom the hero had yet to meet, was busy with her work. The woman found the duties of a lord difficult, although she had already assumed this position a long time ago. Despite the large number of wise assistants, all decisions remained with Marie alone, while Madame dreamed of a vacation, which she constantly had to postpone due to work. And now she needed to look at the students who had impressive results. Emily had no idea that Prompty herself had noticed her abilities when she read the description. The woman could not get rid of her anxiety because there were few good candidates. Her assistant understood why they were so worried, as they were not prepared for the break. Many magicians left the association for personal reasons, so the rest had more work. Meanwhile, Ralph searched for the escaped wizard, whose powers surpassed those of many. The guy had already visited a large number of cities, but still hadn't found any information about that person. In fact, he didn't just choose this particular place because he was looking for someone else. For a long time, Ralph had been following the songs of the beautiful singer, not suspecting that she was the bird Shepe. It took all of James's composure to hide the fact that he knew about that singer. He had no intention of revealing to anyone the secret of Shichiba, who successfully pretended to be human on the internet. Each time, Lorrington had to admit that he had suffered another failure. The man no longer knew where he should go to find the escaped Paul Wilson. James rarely visited his sister, but each time their meetings ended with long walks. The girl always loved receiving attention from her brother, although she tried to cope on her own. They saw each other only occasionally, so she didn't immediately notice that James had grown so much in magic. It all came to the point that he was taking an official exam, which would continue tomorrow. Of course, the family had to celebrate each other's achievements to capture the moment. Emily had so much news lately that she hardly kept her mouth shut. Lynn barely had time to listen to his emotional little sister, who shared with him all the details of her life. The evening went well for both of them, delighting them with a delicious dinner in an expensive restaurant. The hero began to earn so well that it was not difficult for him to go to such establishments. All this time, Emily had no idea that her brother had developed their shop quite well from their parents' side. Now the girl did not have to worry about the fact that the future might turn out to be poor for her. So the first thing the younger Lynn did was head to the rare pavilion, despite the late hour. James never thought that his sister dreamed of visiting such an expensive place. Emily was finally able to proudly visit the pavilion, because her brother had enough money for everything. But the first thing the girl looked at was the animal, the price of which was exorbitant. The cat did not immediately appreciate the appearance of the creature, the cost of which could have been used to buy houses. As much as Emily would have liked to acquire such a friend for herself, her brother didn't have enough money. At that moment, James felt ashamed of waking up late, because he could have saved up for the beast. But the embarrassment quickly passed, as the hero soon noticed a product that he liked. The thing was that at the exhibition, one merchant was selling some seemingly nondescript eggs of some kind of creature. But Lin knew that through evolution, he could quickly develop them to incredible levels. But the guy was afraid to even imagine how much effort it would take him to improve them. While his sister was admiring the animals around her, the boy had plenty of time to think, so he chose to consult with Leo instead of looking at other products. Doubts tormented the young man, since buying these eggs could bring problems rather than benefits. While he was thinking, other people became interested in this item, who also understood the value of eggs. But for some reason, the hero was sure that they were only looking at this product out of curiosity. Suddenly, the merchant himself told James the price, as he noticed that he was thinking about buying. This made Lin even more doubtful, as the price was too strange for eggs. The man could not guarantee that anything truly worthwhile would hatch from these cocoons. He quoted too low a price, so he expectedly received criticism from other buyers. People didn't believe that a good product could be sold at a ridiculous price and still be of high quality. For the first time in her life, Emily found herself in a real crush of customers and merchants, where many were arguing. Amidst all this noise, James was the first to come forward and say that he would buy all the cocoons at that price. He was of the opinion that bad goods would not have been allowed to be displayed in this pavilion. So the hero got rid of all doubts that he shouldn't trust this merchant. But for some reason, the man didn't start selling the cocoons right away, even though he had the opportunity. His pride was hurt by the claims, so he wanted to prove that he really was selling a good product. This required preparation. So the merchant asked James to come to him tomorrow. The hero calmly accepted this turn of events, since he was not going to change his mind anyway. At that time, the guy didn't yet know that two customers were giving him and his sister angry looks. This family wanted to buy cocoons purely for profit, and deliberately tried to lower the price. The next morning, a huge crowd of people wishing to take the exam gathered in front of the main building. That madam watched the magician's anxiety from the side, but she had complete faith only in her daughter. The girl supported her mother's arrogance, since they always successfully got what they wanted. She had to improve one of the animals in a short time, and she had no doubt about her success. Ning made sure that each test subject took the exam in a separate, private room. This only played into the hero's hands, as he didn't want to reveal his true abilities to anyone. Deep down, the leader believed in James, but still tried not to single him out from the crowd. This time, Mari Prompti personally came to the exam to find real talent among the people. The woman was aware that the leader was inventive when it came to choosing topics for testing. She didn't have time to personally consult Nina about the test, so she was a little upset at that moment. The whole point was that Dabi deliberately chose a difficult exam, making the already difficult selection more difficult. Soon, all the candidates discovered that the animals for improvement were too unruly in the process. These weasels have always been known to be nervous, and now they haven't even been fed yet before the upcoming tests. So only a few magicians managed to cope with the violent nature of this magical creature without any problems. And James was one to quickly calm the affection before moving on to the main part of the exam. Leonora had never known before that these animals could be so disobedient to people, while Nin and Marie had long since become familiar with the creature's character and knew how to make friends with them. Depending on the animal's personality, conventional methods might not be suitable for calming it down. Even James brought the weasel back to his senses only because Leo knew a lot of information about animals. There was impatience among the experienced magicians, as not all candidates would be able to pass the test. Marie placed the most bets on the elder Lin, who was a relative of the promising Emily. And James didn't disappoint the examiners, as he still managed to pass the test at the end of the time. The guy wasn't worried about taking so long to improve his caresses, because the result was more important. The main thing was that Marie and Nin appreciated his abilities, and the young hero didn't need more. Prompti immediately became interested in the guy who seemed so capable and strong to her. She knew how difficult it was to come to an agreement with a weasel, without taking into account its character. The woman never lost sight of anyone who could boast of even a little knowledge of magic. Out of nervousness, Marie put undue pressure on James, expecting only a positive decision from him. Only now did the hero recognize in the madam the very same lord who had personally fought the rift several times. The young man had always dreamed of meeting this woman, and the opportunity finally arrived. So he showed all his confidence just to get everyone around him even more interested. As a result, Madam agreed to take James straight to the second entrance exam. Despite feeling a little tired, Lin was not at all worried about the next difficulties. The Dabi family continued to watch with interest the boy who had exceeded all their expectations. Marie had only recently started following the elder Lin, but she was already convinced of his usefulness. If it weren't for such tests, powerful wizards wouldn't be able to track down talents on their own. To speed up the selection process, during the second test, Ning damaged the core of all living creatures. It was such a cruel idea that Prompti did not support her colleague's strange choice. Even Leonora was unable to dissuade her grandfather, although she knew about his decision from the very beginning. When James took on the second challenge, he couldn't even imagine that it would be so difficult. For some reason, the young man felt that the leader's ideas would not deviate very far from the first test. But what he ended up with was a crab that had no living space inside due to damage. There was little time to think, so James had to immediately begin treating the animal. But progress was so slow that the hero began to feel like he wouldn't make it in time, so he soon turned to Mobius for help in restoring his energy. Only in this way was the hero able to successfully complete the treatment of the crab, who had been through a lot. However, Lin's intuition told him that the beast's treatment was not yet over, and indeed, suddenly the crab became worse, since the healing did not help him completely. This situation puzzled the hero, who could not allow the creature to die so as not to fail. He once again summoned all of Mobius's powers, because otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to complete the test in time. With Leo's help, James realized that the rapid healing had damaged the crab's internal organs, so he prioritized the animal's life, even if its appearance would ultimately change dramatically. While the hero was undergoing the test, many young magicians had already gone home empty-handed. Marie was becoming increasingly worried that this year's exam was too difficult for wizards. But Ning was adamant when it came to magic, as the abilities could be dealt with. Prompti's task was to gather talents as quickly as possible, so she was ready to consider any magicians. So the old man was really in her way, deliberately making things difficult for the young wizards. Soon, one of the assistants announced that the time allotted for the test had ended. Since there was no news from James, The chief and lord decided that he had not passed. But suddenly they heard the satisfied voice of the guy, who was noticeably tired after the test. Lin barely made the deadline, and only because he had a Mobius space with energy. The old man immediately appreciated the approach Lin had taken to saving the creature's life, but Leonora was delighted with the plant, which the guy also managed to improve during the test. In fact, the hero made it just in time, but was still satisfied with the work done. He didn't expect any reward, but Daba wanted to praise the student for being so talented. This is how James got hold of a useful magical item that was usually guarded to death by crabs. When all the tests were completed, the head personally presented Lin with a medal confirming his new rank. By this point, many adults had already noticed enough to speak incoherently, but none of them forgot about congratulating James, who deservedly received a higher status. What pleased the young man most was that he was also provided with luxury housing. In the end, Marie got so carried away that she had to be led out of the hall by the arms. The woman was loudly celebrating until the very end, happy that she had found a truly powerful magician. As soon as the silence returned, the leader handed James 2 whole assistant tokens. In such a status, every wizard was obliged to find protection from strong people. Not every level was given permission to increase the number of assistants. Only now did the hero realize that the recently met Ralph was actually someone's assistant. Naturally, the first thing the hero did was tell his sister about his achievements, who was happy for him. Lin's life changed rapidly after he discovered such powerful abilities within himself. And the first thing he did in this status was go to the pavilion, where he still wanted to buy those cocoons. People now looked at James with admiration whenever they noticed the badge on his chest. But not everyone was so kind to the high-status mages, as there were those who were very envious. There were only a few minutes left before Lin arrived, but that merchant was already being attacked by other customers. One of them turned out to be so emotional that he did not hesitate to attack the man because of his refusal. But the hero appeared just in time, so he stopped the illegal actions of the client. As soon as the man realized that the person in front of him was a high-ranking mage, his expression instantly changed. The hero was pleased to understand that he now occupied a significant place among people in society. Many of those who had previously been outraged by him could now not say a word against the guy. Among the customers was a girl who was unable to pass the exam to improve her level, and her parents treated her cruelly, because in the end they didn't even give her any consolation gift. But all this had nothing to do with the hero, who was now busy talking with the merchant. The man was not lying when he said that he would reserve his goods only for the sake of the young man. They were quickly led into a private room where James had never been before. In fact, this man was a powerful magician, and his being was proof of it. But now the trader could not use it, since the animal was in serious condition. However, it could show the hero the story of how exactly the stranger got those cocoons. The insect demonstrated in detail how the man bravely traveled through the rift. However, he soon became suddenly ill, and the broadcast was completely stopped because of this. From the very beginning, the merchant was connected to the pet, so they shared all the pain. Therefore, the hero's first step was to stabilize the insect's condition so that the merchant would feel better. This circumstance greatly surprised the man, whose name was Paul Wilson, and he had been looking for help for a long time. The magician had to leave the organization of wizards because no one could help him. And then James had such an effect on the insect, as if it were simple. So Paul could not miss out on such a person who was capable of healing his beloved creature. He honestly revealed his identity as a wizard to Lin in order to win the hero's trust. But it didn't end there, because Wilson decided to voluntarily become the young magician's assistant. Before James could say a word against it, Paul had already pronounced the oath that bound them. This is how the hero got his first assistant, although he didn't plan to look for one anytime soon. It was too late to change anything, as Wilson quickly made a deal between them. James still didn't understand the motives of the man who had rushed into making such an important decision. It turned out that only Lin could cure the merchant's insect, so he became his assistant. James had never met people who were so selfless for the sake of animals before, but Paul had already turned to many powerful wizards for many years who knew how to heal animals. And each time he received another refusal, because his case was too complicated for people. Even when the strongest man did not take on the healing, Paul experienced real despair. So the hero became a ray of light in his darkness of sadness, and Wilson did not want to let him go anywhere. None of the people had any idea that the merchant was actually a famous wizard. It seemed to them that the man could not do anything and did not know anything, so they allowed themselves to laugh at him. The hero felt awkward being in Paul's company, but he was powerless to change anything. Wilson himself paid no attention to the stupid, envious people who haunted him throughout his life. For the first time, he was proud that he had found for himself a truly strong, albeit young, master. But even in his role as assistant, Paul had no intention of giving the cocoons to the hero for free. He still had a lot of things to do, so the boy didn't follow Lin this time. But James didn't even think of being upset, because he felt more comfortable being alone in the house. But again, incidents were not long in coming, as Shichebe was unable to cope with the danger. James never imagined that Shippy would suddenly become completely out of control due to hunger. The plant had just taken over the entire backyard by the time the owner returned home. Long arms in the form of vines hurried towards Lin, their whole appearance expressing danger. But the hero was sure that Shippy was simply glad to see him and would not cause him any harm, although from the outside it looked as if the pet was desperately trying to eat its owner and his friends. As soon as James calmed Shippy down, the bird remembered another surprise in the apartment. It turned out that Chaley had sent a few boxes to a regular customer as a surprise. What pleased the hero most was that there were creatures in them, albeit in very poor condition. He himself soon wanted to acquire new animals in order to expand the scale of sales, so he was not at all bothered by the condition of the antelope, which could soon die. Lin entrusted the pets with unpacking the remaining boxes, while he concentrated on the treatment. Shibi and Leo approached the task with caution, as they could easily harm the creatures inside. The cat immediately recognized the spirit of a powerful magical tree in one piece of wood. The hero did not immediately believe that the store owner had given him such an expensive gift, but careful analysis showed that the remains of the tree did indeed belong to a powerful creature. James couldn't even imagine how much money he would be able to make from this rare spirit. But the most pleasant surprise was contained in the last box, which had not been opened for a long time. Out of curiosity, Lin scanned the item and discovered that it contained a rare mineral. In fact, Chaley was very smart to send all these gifts at her own expense. The woman was sure that James would come to her for other goods, and she guessed right. The guy didn't keep himself waiting long, as he guessed that Moran needed something from him. He had long been convinced that the woman could be trusted, which is why he came first. It turned out that the owner would like to buy from Lin, as she had heard about his rare creatures. It was in James's interest to maintain a good relationship with the woman, so he agreed. It cost the guy almost nothing to upgrade his levels anyway, so it will only increase his sales. But for Chaley, this was a huge step up, as she had always had supply issues. In the client, she found an excellent supplier for herself, since the guy never cheated. So Moran's joy knew no bounds when she realized how big the parties would be. Now the lady did not have to worry about the store closing at some point due to losses. As soon as he made a deal with Chaley, the hero returned to his home again for the sake of development. He tried to improve the creatures every day so that he could gradually become stronger in skills. And just today, the young man finished healing the antelope, so that it was ready to develop. James approached the evolution of animals he encountered for the first time with particular care. Everything is done to qualitatively and smoothly raise creatures for further profitable sale. Just 6 months ago, the young man lived without magic, but now he has achieved such incredible results. That's why he treated his work with love, because he could no longer imagine himself being weak. With the help of Mobius, the hero made detailed plans for development, increasing his level. The only thing that bothered James now was the presence of Paul in his life and home. Wislan was even too responsible, something the young hero still couldn't get used to. In a short time, the man became friends with all the pets that were in the master's house. He failed to charm only Shippy, who was hostile to everyone except his master. But the most surprising thing was that Paul analyzed the master's income and made his own suggestions. He always stuck to his decisions, even if he made them in the heat of the moment. As a token of gratitude, the hero took the time to examine his assistant's pet. Last time, the guy noticed that this creature was barely able to move. Paul had chosen him as his companion for life, and now the creature was on the verge of death. James understood Wilson's anxiety, as he had gone through so much for his pet. The man was lucky, because the hero had just recently leveled up, so he began to heal better. But even with all his skills, the young man will need several months to help the insect. Of course, Paul was ready to wait longer, because no one would take on such a difficult task. Since he had a good assistant, James decided to find him something to do while he was treating his pet. He had been thinking for a long time about expanding the store a little and opening a new one in another city. And most of all, The hero liked the idea of buying a building in the capital of the state because there was money for it. This was a great opportunity for Lin, as Paul had connections in many cities. Until now, by some miracle, James had managed to develop quickly, which he was glad about. The guy wasn't going to stop there, because many more impressions awaited him. But a sudden call from Marie distracted the hero from important matters, as the woman needed help. She nominated Lin as a candidate for training with the ruler, as she said now. Partly, the woman was worried that James would not agree, since he and the head had already thought everything through. Prompty believed in Lin's skills and hoped that Lunali would choose him over all others. Of course, there was another strong candidate preparing for this selection. His name was Thomas Kalim. He had such a good pedigree and connections that he had every chance of beating other competitors. That's why the guy had no doubt about success, because he had never lost to magicians before. It was not surprising that the pets wanted to go with their owner rather than stay in a boring house. They made such cute faces that the hero ultimately couldn't refuse Leo and Shichiba's wishes. This time, it was easier for the young man to take the animals with him rather than try to convince them of their decision. So for a few more hours before the rescue, the pets behaved as if they were the kings of the world. Leo was busy examining the assistant's insect, which still impressed him with its size. Using this creature as an example, the hero wanted to grow something similar for his beloved sister. He was confident that Emily could handle the cocoon, no matter what the insect's abilities were. But now he had to go to the place where Nin and Marie were waiting for him before the test. A large number of people gathered, but only a few of them planned to show their abilities. As soon as James appeared, the guard quickly prepared transport for him to move. The young man could not even imagine that he would not be given time to calmly study the situation. All the other candidates were preparing with all their might, so the guards were ordered not to wait for anything. So soon they all took off into the air together to deliver James to his destination on time. A pleasant air journey over a beautiful city with advanced technologies awaited them. Meanwhile, the ruler of Lunali was awaiting the tests of her potential students. Along the way, with the help of assistants, she developed a beautiful garden, which had long been her pride. The girls did their jobs well, so the mistress didn't have to think much. If the assistants did not bring Lunali all the news on time, she would have difficulty completing many tasks. So Madame was delighted that she had once hired such smart girls as assistants. While she had time, the woman studied the candidates' profiles, many of whom had many skills, but the assistants still remained of the opinion that no one could compare with their mistress. Madame really did achieve such heights at a young age that it is unlikely that anyone could defeat her. The only thing her assistants lacked was the wisdom that was often found only in adults. But Lunali forgave the girls for all their mistakes, since they rarely interfered with doing something wrong. However, she did not listen to the opinions of her assistants, who did not believe in the candidate's strengths. There were still arguments among the girls about whether the mistress should take someone as a student. They didn't know that even Lunali's status didn't allow her to go against such a decision from the council. So the assistants shook the air with words, since the ruler did not stop them in any way. In fact, the woman herself was interested in what the new generation of magicians could surprise her with. She understood that some of the assistants envied those people who achieved some status. If the ruler were in their place, she would also choose the most powerful mentor to serve him. Soon the assistants noticed that their mistress looked surprisingly confident and calm. This gave them hope that the student election would ultimately go smoothly for everyone. But deep down, Lunali couldn't cope with the experience, although she hid it masterfully. Meanwhile, Ning took the hero along with him to give him some advice before the test. Even Marie was present this time, despite the fact that she usually had a lot of work. The established magicians had many recommendations for James, who still had to go through this path. Although the boy knew about the upcoming test, he did not expect that the ruler herself would be watching them. Marie was not very happy about this turn of events, as she had planned to recruit Lin into her ranks. While the hero could not even dream of such an opportunity, he was overjoyed. Meanwhile, Thomas's relatives were also worried about him, because the boy trained until the very end. But he was confident that his studies would not in any way affect the brilliant result he would achieve later. While the others prepared in their own ways, the hero was helped with beautiful clothes and parting words from Marie and Nin. The woman had little time to say to James because she understood how difficult it would be for him among the others. Prompty wouldn't let the guy go on a simple animal, so she prepared a good steed. For the first time, the young man felt as if everyone around him were his parents and cared for him. Along the way, Marie managed to give Lin a little more verbal help so that he would be less worried during the test. Although time was running out, the woman did not fly over the ocean, and there was a reason for that. It was not surprising that the hero had questions about this, because he still didn't know a lot. And the lady showed the young man by her actions that the huge whales do not allow anyone passage over the ocean. The power emanating from them was so strong that James was no longer inclined to go near the salt water. Lin assumed that someone could still use magic to bypass the territory of the huge whales. But Marie thought about this option with horror, because the center of the ocean was even more restless and angry. There lived creatures of a level that was not even found among the ruler's animals. So usually no one dared to fly across the ocean, as it was tantamount to death. The hero's whole world turned upside down at that moment. Since he had no idea such beasts existed, he still had a lot to learn. So the future seemed interesting and exciting. As they traveled, Marie became increasingly convinced that the hero was hiding part of his abilities. In this regard, he was a good fit as a student for Lunali, who also kept silent about power. But Prompty still shared valuable information with the guy so that he had a chance to win the test. The woman knew a lot about the divisions of being levels, because at high ranks it is not enough to achieve promotion. As they flew, night turned to day, and the friends were presented with stunning views of the plains. Only now did Marie remember that James could really use at least one rune of power. Even Prompty collected only a few in her entire life, as it was a very difficult task. So she didn't expect to see that Lin had somehow miraculously gotten hold of one of the runes already. If it weren't for the time limit, the lady would have thrown the guy off the Pegasus as a precaution. At that moment, she still had no idea that James was keeping silent about several runes that he had found. But even without this, Marie felt that the guy was much stronger than he wanted to show everyone. They still had time on the road to discuss options for raising the animals. James immediately gravitated towards high rank, although he understood that his efforts were not yet enough. Even with the promotion runes, many failed to evolve their beasts, so it was a long road. But Marie personally managed it, and that's why her Pegasus carried Lin to the right place so quickly. The boy didn't feel a drop of excitement, since he hadn't planned to become Lunali's student. But for him, it was a great opportunity to look at the surroundings of a beautiful city. But another candidate named Liam Fergus needed only to win and was not going to back down. His father had complete faith in his son, who had never let him down at such important moments. So both of them were dissatisfied with the appearance of Thomas Calum, who simply wanted to get acquainted. Liam had been arrogant towards anyone who was his opponent since childhood, so he didn't say hello. Thomas's grandfather tried to defend his grandson, but what could he say against Fergus's sharp tongue? The guy immediately found something to cling to in order to verbally offend his emotional opponent. It worked because Kaleem hated it when anyone spoke badly about his relatives. But Liam's father put an end to the arguments, as he understood that it was not yet time for them. But this still didn't stop the younger Fergus from bragging and being proud. Like their children, adults also competed among themselves to see who was wiser and stronger. The elder Fergus generally believed that his colleague had merely borrowed the merits of other people. By this time, the boys had finished all their quarrels, so they watched the adults with surprise. But suddenly, Liam brought up the unpleasant topic again to completely irritate his opponent. Thomas had always been proud of his public appearances since childhood, so he didn't like being made fun of. The guy believed that he deserved to be an internet star, no matter what all those stupid idiots said. The only thing that saved them all from another quarrel was the appearance of an assistant from the ruler herself. The girl was ordered to escort the candidates to the testing site, even if they refused. But she immediately realized that every person in this place was determined to go to the very end. Liam shouldn't have been dismissive of the assistant, who looked rather weak. Like many of the girls around Lunali, this lady possessed incredible inner strength and charisma. As soon as Fergus felt this, he immediately closed his mouth and did not approach his assistant again. All they had to do was wait for James to arrive, and soon the girl noticed the winged Pegasus. She had the best attitude towards Marie, who always brought in good and strong candidates. But the guys greeted Lin with disdain, as he didn't look like a truly powerful magician. Even in his behavior, the hero was inferior to his rivals, because there was not a drop of pride or selfishness in him. So it was no surprise that Thomas considered James a weak and unimpressive opponent. In this test, he saw only Liam as a threat, and he had no doubt that he would win. While the assistant was explaining the rules of conduct, only Lin continued to be in the clouds. His gaze caught the magic tree, the power of which only an uncouth boor could fail to appreciate. The girl personally grew this plant, so she was glad that someone else liked it. But they had no time to discuss the ruler herself and her assistants, because the time for testing had come. Although the lady herself had no intention of taking the test, she still felt a little worried for others. In the first test, candidates had to choose one chest, which Lunali herself had prepared. Only James kept breaking during the test because he didn't have good reactions. But Liam and Thomas immediately chose their targets, trying to get to them first. The hero's plans did not include fighting for profit, as he was counting on a more fair test. Only the more daring magicians liked the fact that this way they could show off all their abilities. It so happened that from the very beginning, the guys began to fight with each other over which chest they would receive. None of them wanted to give in to their opponent, as this would mean a personal loss in the test. But the appearance of little Rosie, who was Lunali's personal assistant, changed the balance of power. While the boys were fighting for the golden chests, the hero headed towards the gray one. But he couldn't get it either. This is because, first, all candidates had to pass the Rosie test. Liam and Thomas were eager to get to the point, wanting to show off their best skills, while James was glad that he was given an easier test from one of the sisters. Only Marie understood that in reality it would be difficult for everyone, because the girls were known for their cunning. Lunali rarely produced sisters who even had similar abilities to each other. Rosie chose James as her first opponent, and realized he would be a tough candidate. They had been imbuing the object with magic for several minutes now, and the young man hadn't even begun to tire of the magic. While Lin was busy with an easier test, Liam found a more challenging opponent among the sisters. He thought he had gotten ahead of Thomas, but in reality, the guy simply decided to wear out his opponent at the lady's expense. Soon, with the help of adults, all preparations for the difficult test were completed. The head warden personally ensured that no one was harmed during the use of magic. Only when the arena was fully prepared did she allow the test itself to begin. At that moment, James was gazing at the battle that was about to begin very close to him, and Rosie was quick to take advantage of this to gain an advantage in their own testing. But all this time, the guy was better than her. But the girl reminded Lin that he should not be distracted. No matter how Liam's battle went, the hero had his own task, and he had to think only about it. Fergus thought with pleasure about how very soon he would achieve victory in the battle with the girl. It didn't even occur to the guy that this girl didn't just occupy a high rank with Lunali for nothing. It was not difficult for her to repel the attack of the powerful creature of the guy who was self-confident. Only after the first attack did the young man realize that he should take this battle more seriously. So he was no longer going to give in to a girl just because she seemed fragile and weak. His beast specialized in water attacks, and now was the opportunity to use them. Since the room was single, a light, cool rain began to fall on the hero at that moment. But the caretaker quickly rectified the situation so that James could focus on his testing. Liam was ready to throw all his strength into finishing the battle with one of Rosie's sisters with one blow. But the girl had such strong defensive abilities that the guy couldn't. Their battle resembled more a real fight to the death than a typical test. All this time, Lin watched the battle with amazement, while steadily maintaining his aura. Of course, the shark wasn't the only pet Liam owned that thought he was strong. As soon as Fergus realized that her attacks would lead to nothing, he immediately changed his strategy. He didn't even show this water dragon to his father, keeping its development and upbringing a secret. So such a powerful beast came as a surprise to many, and symbolized the strength of the young candidate. Only now did Thomas realize that he really had not stood up to the fight against Liam, who had wielded such a creature. And only the assistant was not afraid, since her strength was still enough to repel any attacks. Realizing that she was dragging out the fight, the lady called upon her pet, who had been sleeping until then, to attack. Now they were fighting almost equally again, since Rosie still hadn't summoned the second beast. Fergus tried his best, as being Lunali's apprentice would bring him good fame. That's why he didn't hesitate to attack Rosie, desperately trying to break her spirit as quickly as possible. As a result, his attacks began to break the remaining barriers that protected the participants from magic. But the caretaker corrected the situation in time so that not a single test was interrupted. Soon, one of Rosie's sisters noticed that they were gradually starting to destroy the entire building. So Liam suggested stopping the battle in time, so as not to accidentally harm the others. However, the girl had not yet demonstrated everything to the young man, who had poor control over his power. So she showed him how careful you should be when you're fighting one person. Her magic created such a strong wind that Fergus barely managed to stay on his feet after the attack. Of course, he couldn't give up without a fight in such a situation, so he tried to defend himself. However, Liam still managed to attack the girl in response in the hope that she would not be saved. But so far, not a single attack by the young man has achieved its goal. And this time was no exception. It had never occurred to Fergus before that his most powerful throw would be so useless. As a result, the guy had no choice but to acknowledge Rosie's skills and abilities. At this moment, the old man began to worry about his grandson, as he knew the maximum of his abilities. Thomas hadn't even started the test yet, but he acted as if he was sure to win. But Liam wasn't about to admit defeat, as that would give the advantage to other candidates. He used all his last strength to cast a spell that was too unstable. These streams of water created a real chaos among themselves, which was difficult to cope with. But the assistant was not at a loss, as she had been honing her skills with other Rosies for many years. The girl's beast was a powerful creature that fought against the water currents. Once again, victory eluded Liam, no matter how complex the methods he used in battle. Fury gave Fergus strength, and he put all his skill into the final and most powerful blow. Only now did a real threat loom over Rosie, because the water currents were too unstable. Everyone in the room noticed that the girl's mighty beast could not cope with such a huge flow. Elder Fergus knew all about this spell, so he did not stay put. It was only thanks to his timely protection that Rosie remained unharmed and was saved. If James hadn't joined the defense, things would have ended much worse for the assistant. It was clear from Liam's expression that he wouldn't be able to use magic for some time due to fatigue. But Rosie still nobly admitted her defeat, since she was unable to defend herself from the blow. But the danger to Fergus's life did not end there, for he had greatly exceeded his limits. Although they were rivals, the hero could not ignore a man who needed help. Everyone around was surprised by the fact that James restored Liam's powers with such ease. For adults, this meant that Lin's magic had a rare and very pure aura in this world. That's why the hero received a lot of thanks after curing Fergus. Only Thomas was dissatisfied with the fact that no one noticed him after 2 tests of candidates. The assistants could already make preliminary conclusions about the skills of James and Liam. They liked Lin the most, whose skills were based on an exceptional aura. The overseer couldn't deny Liam's offensive talent, but healing was more useful. Even the elder Fergus was not offended by this decision, as he was grateful for his son's help. That's why almost all the assistants were in favor of giving the main prize to young James. The caretaker almost did it, carrying the golden box in her hands. But Thomas ruined everything. The guy never passed any test and considered it unfair to himself. His impudence did not please the leading lady, but she had good manners and kept silent. Thomas also wanted to show his strength in order to fight in a fair fight for the main prize. This time, another sister, Rosie, stepped forward to provide a worthy resistance to the candidate. She was confident in her abilities, since she was the only one who did not take part in the preparation of the tests. James didn't care if he didn't get the box, as long as he got to see some good fights. Rosie gave the candidate a choice of challenge, whether it would be combat or healing the creature. Thomas understood that he would not be able to withstand the girl's attack, so he chose to help the animal. The girl didn't waste time on trifles and put all the chests on the line if the guy won. This format suited Kaleem, who was confident that he would definitely win. Only those around him understood that Thomas had little chance against this little sister Rosie. But the assistant had already started the test, so it was too late to back out. It turned out that special creatures had been prepared in the ruler's palace for such testing. These were the cubs of a wild wolf, which was always aggressive during treatment. They were so badly hurt that they couldn't fight back, but they were still nasty animals. Even in his own space at Mobius, the hero would hardly have been able to cope with this healing quickly, so he was very interested to see what actions the self-confident Thomas would take. Lin realized that he had a great opportunity to gain new knowledge. Initially, both competitors acted at almost the same speed when passing the test, but Rosie had a much better focus because she wasn't worried about passing the test. So soon, Thomas was literally a couple of steps behind the girl who was a master of healing. It was not difficult for her to quickly find the necessary ingredients that combined with the aura of the wolves. But for Kaleem, everything was much more difficult, since it was his first time working with such a heavy beast. What confused the hero most was that even the recipes for both ended up being very different. It was unclear who would ultimately heal the wolf cub first, because speed wasn't the only thing that mattered. As soon as Thomas noticed that he was starting to lose ground, the guy took decisive action. Although the summoning of this creature caused him pain, Kaleem saw no other way out of this situation. For a long time, the guy hid from everyone that he had almost reached the highest stage of unity with the beast. For the first time in his life, the hero saw such a transformation, from which powerful energy emanated. Even Kalima's grandfather didn't know for sure whether his grandson would be able to cope with the wayward creature. Thomas's level up hadn't finished yet, so this animal could have harmed him. It was clear to James that with such a beast, this guy was only a short step away from promotion. Only the caretaker was dissatisfied that she had not been told anything about this skill of the Kalima family. The old man deliberately kept silent about the fact that Thomas had taken one of the cruel creatures of the rift for himself. It was clear from Lin's face that he had little idea what was happening to Kaleem's body right now. James did not read as much as a smart guy, so he did not have enough information. The caretaker acted kindly when she decided to personally tell the boy about the worm. Many of them settled inside the host, firmly clinging to its body for the sake of symbiosis. This ability seemed so dangerous to the hero that he did not want to have anything to do with it. But Thomas, for some reason, condemned himself to pain, hoping that it would bring him greater strength, although Lin could see that the boy had not received a significant increase in his abilities. In this regard, his Shippy was a much more useful creature, since it remained independent. Many wizards agreed to live with the riftworms because they gave them great power. Thanks to them, magicians reached incredible heights, even if they had previously been able to do almost nothing. But most people still did not associate their lives with worms, which always remained dangerous. Because if the animal doesn't like something, it will start to suck all the juices out of its owner. After all he had heard, James no longer believed that such a beast could be a comrade. But Thomas didn't care about his health, as long as he achieved his desired goal as a student. With his actions, he accidentally interfered with Rosie's process, which left the girl very unhappy. Since her opponent had released the creature, the lady also did not limit herself in any way in this duel. The assistant missed that feeling of excitement when it was unclear who would win. The hero watched with delight as Rosie skillfully performed each action with care. Soon, Thomas happily announced that he was the first to finish creating a healing potion for the wolf. But his happiness was too hasty, since his assistant also completed her experiment. Now, all they had to do was figure out whose potion would be truly effective for the animal. The saddest thing about this situation was that the treatment process was painful in any case. But eventually, the wolf Rosie was able to come to his senses, and his condition completely stabilized. For the girl, this meant victory, because she coped brilliantly with the task. It turned out that Thomas not only healed the animal, but also managed to raise its level. All of Rosie's sisters saw that their relative had indeed done much less for the forest animal. But the caretaker was not on Kaleem's side, as she had not liked his behavior for a long time. So she asked James and Liam to make a conclusion about who exactly won the competition. Lin had no idea how exactly the creatures were to be assessed, as this was the first time he had been given such a role. While Fergus was sure that the victory should have been given to Rosie's assistant, Thomas's first thought was that his opponent simply did not want to acknowledge his skill. But the hero approached the assessment of the test with all sincerity, although his future depended on it. In the end, the guy also awarded the victory to Rosie, since he had good reasons for doing so. Kaleem could not bear such humiliation, because he still believed that he had coped better with the test. However, the hero prepared a good explanation for why he chose the assistant. The whole point was that she worked on the quality of the beast, and it was stronger than Thomas's wolf. So Kaleem really did lose, although he did raise the level of the dangerous wolf a little. Despite everything, Liam was pleased with the spectacle he was shown during the test. But Thomas was so angry that he was not ready to accept consoling congratulations from his rivals. In a fit of rage, he made a grave mistake, as he spoke disrespectfully about Lunali. The reaction of the caretaker, who adored her mistress to the depths of her soul, was not long in coming. Everyone around felt a terrible cold, although the girl only released a little aura. The old man was most afraid for his grandson, because he understood that the caretaker could not be defeated. When a girl lost her temper, even pleas for mercy would hardly have helped anyone. So the elder Kaleem had no choice but to allow his grandson to be punished. All the Rosies did not dare interfere with the caretaker's judgment, because they could also accidentally get into trouble. The last time they saw the caretaker in such a state was when an important guest arrived. He also said something bad about Lunali, and these were his last words in front of the girl. From then on, he was seen in a wheelchair for a long time, as the guy was seriously injured. James was most afraid that something similar awaited the elder Kaleem, who was weak. The man understood the danger of the situation, but still wanted to take the full brunt of the blow for his grandson. Lin thought such nobility was unnecessary, since Thomas was not known for his ability to express gratitude. Meanwhile, the sisters painted Lena with increasingly terrifying pictures of the lady's rage. Such a cruel punishment seemed unfair to James, especially for an old man. But the elder Kaleem loved his grandson so much that he always turned a blind eye to his misdeeds. Even now, Thomas didn't repent at all, and his grandfather still remained on his side. It was perfectly clear to Liam that his opponent would soon be eliminated from the competition. None of the adults expected that Thomas would put his grandfather even above the ruler herself. The old man had not taught his grandson such behavior, and now he needed to somehow correct his mistakes. The Kalem family's stupid words only made the girl, who didn't like to forgive people, even more angry. However, this time she still turned to James for advice to find out his opinion on the situation. The hero had no idea why, of all people, the girl turned to him. It was clear to him that the old man would definitely not withstand the punishment, since he was too weak. So James made it his mission to prove to the caretaker that things weren't so bad. Initially, the girl did not want to accept this truth, because she wanted revenge for everything. But the young man convinced her that the old man should not have to suffer because of the pranks of his stupid grandson. He remembered that the Kilam family had brought a lot of benefit to the empire, despite their behavior. Lin's reasoning pleased the caretaker, as she always had wisdom in such matters. The girl didn't just ask him for advice. She was checking to see if the guy was as pure as he appeared in his biography. And with his actions, James proved that there is no point in giving in to anger over other people's naivety. The elder Kilam was overwhelmed with gratitude to the young man who had taken his age into account when making his decision. So Thomas had no choice but to follow his relative's example. Although in reality, the guy was ready to curse everyone who had just humiliated him with such help. As a result, Rosie rewarded Liam with good things for being able to pass the test with her. Fergus no longer claimed the role of a student, since he believed in the abilities of young James. So the assistants didn't have to deal with the mess the candidates had created again. As a parting gift, Liam invited Lin to visit him, as he wanted to thank him for the treatment. The elder Keelam also hurried to leave the estate while he was being released in peace, despite the chaos. And only Thomas remained dissatisfied in this situation, because his abilities were not admired. Initially, the hero knew that the ruler wanted to see him, but he still did not believe it. Until the very end, he thought that someone would say that this was a joke. But this did not happen. James only became more frightened when the caretaker reminded him to respect his mistress. Of course, the guy had no intention of laughing at the most powerful sorceress in the country. Along the way, the girl gave Lin some small instructions so that he wouldn't say anything wrong. She couldn't go with him to the very end, because Lunali wanted a confidential conversation. Finally, the hero received a few words of encouragement from Marie, who was happy for him. James's heart was beating anxiously in his chest, but it was too late to turn back. As he walked towards the ruler, the others watched the young man with concern. It was the first time in her life that the caretaker had seen Lunali pay so much attention to anyone, so she could not predict how exactly this conversation in the lady's personal estate would end. No matter how calm the woman seemed on the outside, a real fire was raging inside her. She was beside herself with anxiety, wanting this meeting to be more perfect than the others. That's why Madame tormented all the assistants, forcing them to constantly fix the interior around. In her dreams, Lunali often romanticized the teacher-student relationship she enjoyed. In the past, she herself had gone through a lot with her mentor and was grateful to him. It was because of those trials that the woman became so strong that she took the place of ruler. So for her student, she would like to become exactly the same kind of person whom he would respect. That is why the lady was so worried inside, because she was not mentally prepared for the responsibility. Soon, the important moment arrived, and the hero arrived for his first meeting with the man who would be his teacher. At first glance, he sensed the powerful aura emanating from the ruler of Lunali, so the guy showed her maximum respect, as all the assistants around him advised him to. But Lunali's anxiety betrayed her uncertainty as she asked about the students' demands. This question really stumped the young man, since it was usually the masters who made the requests, and then a woman, who was several times higher in status, suddenly decided to consult with a young man. However, James answered all of Madame's questions with dignity in the hope that she would like him. As a result, Lunali made a decision in a flash, since she had known about Lin's abilities for a long time. This is how the hero became a true disciple of the woman who is called the most powerful healer.